Good evening, my friend. It's time to slow down and drift into another world. Tell me, what time is it where you are? Maybe midnight, maybe just after a long day. Let me know in the comments before you close your eyes. Tonight, we open the Gray Fairy book, collected by Andrew Lang, a treasure of forgotten tales where courage meets magic and dreams walk beside us. So, find a quiet spot, breathe deeply, and let these old stories guide you into peaceful sleep. Now, close your eyes and let the fairy world begin. Cannetella. There was once upon a time a king who reigned over a country called Bello Poggio. He was very rich and powerful and had everything in the world he could desire except a child. But at last, after he had been married for many years and was quite an old man, his wife, Renzolla, presented him with a fine daughter, whom they called Cannetella. She grew up into a beautiful girl and was as tall and straight as a young fir tree. When she was 18 years old, her father called her to him and said, "You are of an age now, my daughter, to marry and settle down. But as I love you more than anything else in the world and desire nothing but your happiness, I am determined to leave the choice of a husband to yourself. Choose a man after your own heart, and you are sure to satisfy me." Cannetella thanked her father very much for his kindness and consideration, but told him that she had not the slightest wish to marry and was quite determined to remain single. The king, who felt himself growing old and feeble and longed to see an heir to the throne before he died, was very unhappy at her words and begged her earnestly not to disappoint him. When Cannetella saw that the king had set his heart on her marriage, she said, "Very well, dear father. I will marry to please you, for I do not wish to appear ungrateful for all your love and kindness, but you must find me a husband, handsomer, cleverer, and more charming than anyone else in the world." The king was overjoyed by her words, and from early in the morning till late at night, he sat at the window and looked carefully at all the passers-by, in the hopes of finding a son-in-law among them. One day, seeing a very good-looking man crossing the street, the king called his daughter and said, "Come quickly, dear Cannetella, and look at this man, for I think he might suit you as a husband." They called the young man into the palace and set a sumptuous feast before him, with every sort of delicacy you can imagine. In the middle of the meal, the youth let an almond fall out of his mouth, which, however, he picked up again very quickly and hid under the tablecloth. When the feast was over, the stranger went away, and the king asked Cannetella, "Well, what did you think of the youth?" "I think he was a clumsy wretch," replied Cannetella. "Fancy a man of his age letting an almond fall out of his mouth." When the king heard her answer, he returned to his watch at the window, and shortly afterwards a very handsome young man passed by. The king instantly called his daughter to come and see what she thought of the newcomer. "Call him in," said Cannetella, "that we may see him close." Another splendid feast was prepared, and when the stranger had eaten and drunk as much as he was able and had taken his departure, the king asked Cannetella how she liked him. "Not at all," replied his daughter. "What could you do with a man who requires at least 2 servants to help him on with his cloak, because he is too awkward to put it on properly himself?" "If that's all you have against him," said the king, "I see how the land lies. You are determined not to have a husband at all, but marry someone you shall, for I do not mean my name and house to die out." "Well then, my dear parent," said Cannetella, I must tell you at once that you had better not count upon me, for I never mean to marry unless I can find a man with a gold head and gold teeth." The king was very angry at finding his daughter so obstinate, but as he always gave the girl her own way in everything, he issued a proclamation to the effect that any man with a gold head and gold teeth might come forward and claim the princess as his bride, and the kingdom of Belo Puojo as a wedding gift. Now the king had a deadly enemy called Scioravante, who was a very powerful magician. No sooner had this man heard of the proclamation than he summoned his attendant spirits and commanded them to gild his head and teeth. The spirits said, at first, that the task was beyond their powers, and suggested that a pair of golden horns attached to his forehead would both be easier to make and more comfortable to wear. But Scioravante would allow no compromise, and insisted on having a head and teeth made of the finest gold. When it was fixed on his shoulders, he went for a stroll in front of the palace. And the king, seeing the very man he was in search of, called his daughter and said, "Just look out of the window, and you will find exactly what you want." Then, as Scioravante was hurrying past, the king shouted out to him, "Just stop a minute, brother, and don't be in such desperate haste. If you will step in here, you shall have my daughter for a wife, and I will send attendants with her, and as many horses and servants as you wish." "1,000 thanks," returned Scioravante. "I shall be delighted to marry your daughter, but it is quite unnecessary to send anyone to accompany her. Give me a horse, and I will carry off the princess in front of my saddle, and will bring her to my own kingdom, where there is no lack of courtiers or servants, or indeed of anything your daughter can desire." At first, the king was very much against Cannetella's departing in this fashion, but finally Scioravante got his way, and placing the princess before him on his horse, he set out for his own country. Towards evening he dismounted, and entering a stable, he placed Cannetella in the same stall as his horse, and said to her, "Now listen to what I have to say. I am going to my home now, and that is a 7 years' journey from here. You must wait for me in this stable, and never move from the spot, or let yourself be seen by a living soul. If you disobey my commands, it will be the worse for you." The princess answered meekly, "Sir, I am your servant, and will do exactly as you bid me. But I should like to know what I am to live on till you come back." "You can take what the horses leave," was Scioravante's reply. When the magician had left her, Cannetella felt very miserable, and bitterly cursed the day she was born. She spent all her time weeping and bemoaning the cruel fate that had driven her from a palace into a stable, from soft down cushions to a bed of straw, and from the dainties of her father's table to the food that the horses left. She led this wretched life for a few months, and during that time she never saw who fed and watered the horses, for it was all done by invisible hands. One day, when she was more than usually unhappy, she perceived a little crack in the wall, through which she could see a beautiful garden with all manner of delicious fruits and flowers growing in it. The sight and smell of such delicacies were too much for poor Cannetella, and she said to herself, "I will slip quietly out and pick a few oranges and grapes, and I don't care what happens. Who is there to tell my husband what I do? And even if he should hear of my disobedience, he cannot make my life more miserable than it is already." So she slipped out and refreshed her poor, starved body with the fruit she plucked in the garden. But a short time afterwards her husband returned unexpectedly, and one of the horses instantly told him that Cannetella had gone into the garden in his absence and had stolen some oranges and grapes. Scioravante was furious when he heard this, and seizing a huge knife from his pocket, he threatened to kill his wife for her disobedience. But Cannetella threw herself at his feet and implored him to spare her life, saying that hunger drove even the wolf from the wood. At last, she succeeded in so far softening her husband's heart that he said, "I will forgive you this time and spare your life. But if you disobey me again, and I hear on my return that you have as much as moved out of the stall, I will certainly kill you. So, beware, for I am going away once more, and shall be absent for 7 years." With these words he took his departure, and Cannetella burst into a flood of tears, and wringing her hands, she moaned, "Why was I ever born to such a hard fate? Oh, Father, how miserable you have made your poor daughter. But why should I blame my father? For I have only myself to thank for all my sufferings. I got the cursed head of gold, and it has brought all this misery on me. I am indeed punished for not doing as my father wished." When a year had gone by, it chanced one day that the king's cooper passed the stables, where Cannetella was kept prisoner. She recognized the man and called him to come in. At first he did not know the poor princess, and could not make out who it was that called him by name. But when he heard Cannetella's tale of woe, he hid her in a big, empty barrel he had with him, partly because he was sorry for the poor girl, and even more because he wished to gain the king's favor. Then he slung the barrel on a mule's back, and in this way the princess was carried to her own home. They arrived at the palace about 4 o'clock in the morning, and the cooper knocked loudly at the door. When the servants came in haste and saw only the cooper standing at the gate, they were very indignant, and scolded him soundly for coming at such an hour and waking them all out of their sleep. The king, hearing the noise and the cause of it, sent for the cooper, for he felt certain the man must have some important business to have come and disturbed the whole palace at such an early hour. The cooper asked permission to unload his mule, and Cannetella crept out of the barrel. At first, the king refused to believe that it was really his daughter, for she had changed so terribly in a few years, and had grown so thin and pale that it was pitiful to see her. At last, the princess showed her father a mole she had on her right arm, and then he saw that the poor girl was indeed his long-lost Cannetella. He kissed her 1,000 times, and instantly had the choicest food and drink set before her. After she had satisfied her hunger, the king said to her, "Who would have thought, my dear daughter, to have found you in such a state? What, may I ask, has brought you to this pass?" In the meantime, Scioravante had returned to the stables, and one of the horses told him that Cannetella had been taken away by a cooper in a barrel. When the wicked magician heard this, he was beside himself with rage, and, hastening to the kingdom of Bello Puoggio, he went straight to an old woman who lived exactly opposite the royal palace, and said to her, "If you will let me see the king's daughter, I will give you whatever reward you like to ask for." The woman demanded 100 ducats of gold, and Scioravante counted them out of his purse and gave them to her without a murmur. Then the old woman led him to the roof of the house, where he could see Cannetella combing out her long hair in a room in the top story of the palace. The princess happened to look out of the window, and when she saw her husband gazing at her, she got such a fright that she flew downstairs to the king and said, "My lord and father, unless you shut me up instantly in a room with 7 iron doors, I am lost." "If that's all," said the king, "it shall be done at once." And he gave orders for the doors to be closed on the spot. When Fioravante saw this, he returned to the old woman and said, "I will give you whatever you like if you will go into the palace, hide under the princess's bed, and slip this little piece of paper beneath her pillow, saying, as you do so, 'May everyone in the palace, except the princess, fall into a sound sleep.'" The old woman demanded another 100 golden ducats, and then proceeded to carry out the magician's wishes. No sooner had she slipped the piece of paper under Cannetella's pillow than all the people in the palace fell fast asleep, and only the princess remained awake. Then Fioravante hurried to the 7 doors and opened them one after the other. Cannetella screamed with terror when she saw her husband, but no one came to her help, for all in the palace lay as if they were dead. The magician seized her in the bed on which she lay and was going to carry her off with him, when the little piece of paper which the old woman had placed under her pillow fell on the floor. In an instant, all the people in the palace woke up, and as Cannetella was still screaming for help, they rushed to her rescue. They seized Fioravante and put him to death, so he was caught in the trap which he had laid for the princess. And, as is so often the case in this world, the biter himself was bit. The Ogre. There lived once upon a time in the land of Marigliano a poor woman called Marcella, who had 6 pretty daughters, all as upright as young fir trees, and an only son called Antonio, who was so simple as to be almost an idiot. Hardly a day passed without his mother saying to him, "What are you doing, you useless creature? If you weren't too stupid to look after yourself, I would order you to leave the house and never to let me see your face again." Every day the youth committed some fresh piece of folly, till at last Marcella, losing all patience, gave him a good beating, which so startled Antonio that he took to his heels and never stopped running till it was dark and the stars were shining in the heavens. He wandered on for some time, not knowing where to go, and at last he came to a cave, at the mouth of which sat an ogre, uglier than anything you can conceive. He had a huge head and wrinkled brow, eyebrows that met, squinting eyes, a flat, broad nose, and a great gash of a mouth from which 2 huge tusks stuck out. His skin was hairy, his arms enormous, his legs like sword blades, and his feet as flat as ducks. In short, he was the most hideous and laughable object in the world. But Antonio, who, with all his faults, was no coward, and was moreover a very civil-spoken lad, took off his hat and said, "Good day, sir. I hope you are pretty well. Could you kindly tell me how far it is from here to the place where I wish to go?" When the ogre heard this extraordinary question, he burst out laughing, and as he liked the youth's polite manners, he said to him, "Will you enter my service?" "What wages do you give?" replied Antonio. "If you serve me faithfully," returned the ogre, "I'll be bound you'll get enough wages to satisfy you." So the bargain was struck, and Antonio agreed to become the ogre's servant. He was very well treated in every way, and he had little or no work to do, with the result that in a few days he became as fat as a quail, as round as a barrel, as red as a lobster, and as impudent as a bantam cock. But after 2 years, the lad got weary of this idle life, and longed desperately to visit his home again. The ogre, who could see into his heart and knew how unhappy he was, said to him one day, "My dear Antonio, I know how much you long to see your mother and sisters again, and because I love you as the apple of my eye, I am willing to allow you to go home for a visit. Therefore, take this donkey, so that you may not have to go on foot. But see that you never say, 'Bricklebrit' to him, for if you do, you'll be sure to regret it." Antonio took the beast without as much as saying thank you, and jumping on its back, he rode away in great haste. But he hadn't gone 200 yards when he dismounted and called out, "Bricklebrit." No sooner had he pronounced the word than the donkey opened its mouth and poured forth rubies, emeralds, diamonds, and pearls, as big as walnuts. Antonio gazed in amazement at the sight of such wealth, and joyfully filling a huge sack with the precious stones, he mounted the donkey again and rode on till he came to an inn. Here he got down, and going straight to the landlord, he said to him, "My good man, I must ask you to stable this donkey for me. Be sure you give the poor beast plenty of oats and hay, but beware of saying the word 'Bricklebrit' to him, for if you do, I can promise you will regret it. Take this heavy sack, too, and put it carefully away for me." The landlord, who was no fool, on receiving this strange warning, and seeing the precious stones sparkling through the canvas of the sack, was most anxious to see what would happen if he used the forbidden word. So, he gave Antonio an excellent dinner, with a bottle of fine old wine, and prepared a comfortable bed for him. As soon as he saw the poor simpleton close his eyes and had heard his lusty snores, he hurried to the stables and said to the donkey, "Bricklebrit," and the animal as usual poured out any number of precious stones. When the landlord saw all these treasures, he longed to get possession of so valuable an animal, and determined to steal the donkey from his foolish guest. As soon as it was light next morning, Antonio awoke, and having rubbed his eyes and stretched himself about 100 times, he called the landlord and said to him, "Come here, my friend, and produce your bill, for short reckonings make long friends." When Antonio had paid his account, he went to the stables and took out his donkey as he thought, and fastening a sack of gravel, which the landlord had substituted for his precious stones, on the creature's back, he set out for his home. No sooner had he arrived there than he called out, "Mother, come quickly, and bring tablecloths and sheets with you, and spread them out on the ground, and you will soon see what wonderful treasures I have brought you." His mother hurried into the house, and opening the linen chest where she kept her daughter's wedding outfits, she took out tablecloths and sheets made of the finest linen, and spread them flat and smooth on the ground. Antonio placed the donkey on them, and called out, "Bricklebrit." But this time he met with no success, for the donkey took no more notice of the magic word than he would have done if a lyre had been twanged in his ear. 2, 3, and 4 times did Antonio pronounce "Bricklebrit," but all in vain, and he might as well have spoken to the wind. Disgusted and furious with the poor creature, he seized a thick stick and began to beat it so hard that he nearly broke every bone in its body. The miserable donkey was so distracted at such treatment that, far from pouring out precious stones, it only tore and dirtied all the fine linen. When poor Mazzella saw her tablecloths and sheets being destroyed, and that instead of becoming rich, she had only been made a fool of, she seized another stick and belabored Antonio so unmercifully with it that he fled before her and never stopped till he reached the ogre's cave. When his master saw the lad returning in such a sorry plight, he understood at once what had happened to him, and making no bones about the matter, he told Antonio what a fool he had been to allow himself to be so imposed upon by the landlord, and to let a worthless animal be palmed off on him instead of his magic donkey. Antonio listened humbly to the ogre's words and vowed solemnly that he would never act so foolishly again. And so a year passed, and once more Antonio was overcome by a fit of homesickness and felt a great longing to see his own people again. Now the ogre, although he was so hideous to look upon, had a very kind heart, and when he saw how restless and unhappy Antonio was, he at once gave him leave to go home on a visit. At parting, he gave him a beautiful tablecloth and said, "Give this to your mother, but see that you don't lose it as you lost the donkey. Until you are safely in your own house, beware of saying, 'Tablecloth, open,' and 'Tablecloth, shut.' If you do, the misfortune be on your own head, for I have given you fair warning." Antonio set out on his journey, but hardly had he got out of sight of the cave than he laid the tablecloth on the ground and said, "Tablecloth, open." In an instant, the tablecloth unfolded itself and disclosed a whole mass of precious stones and other treasures. When Antonio perceived this, he said, "Tablecloth, shut," and continued his journey. He came to the same inn again, and calling the landlord to him, he told him to put the tablecloth carefully away, and whatever he did not, to say, "Tablecloth, open," or "Tablecloth, shut," to it. The landlord, who was a regular rogue, answered, "Just leave it to me. I will look after it as if it were my own." After he had given Antonio plenty to eat and drink, and had provided him with a comfortable bed, he went straight to the tablecloth and said, "Tablecloth, open." It opened at once, and displayed such costly treasures that the landlord made up his mind on the spot to steal it. When Antonio awoke next morning, the host handed him over a tablecloth exactly like his own, and carrying it carefully over his arm, the foolish youth went straight to his mother's house and said, "Now we shall be rich beyond the dreams of avarice, and need never go about in rags again, or lack the best of food." With these words he spread the tablecloth on the ground and said, "Tablecloth, open." But he might repeat the injunction as often as he pleased. It was only waste of breath, for nothing happened. When Antonio saw this, he turned to his mother and said, "That old scoundrel of a landlord has done me once more, but he will live to repent it. For if I ever enter his inn again, I will make him suffer for the loss of my donkey and the other treasures he has robbed me of." Marcella was in such a rage over her fresh disappointment that she could not restrain her impatience, and, turning on Antonio, she abused him soundly and told him to get out of her sight at once, for she would never acknowledge him as a son of hers again. The poor boy was very depressed by her words, and slunk back to his master like a dog with his tail between his legs. When the ogre saw him, he guessed at once what had happened. He gave Antonio a good scolding, and said, "I don't know what prevents me smashing your head in, you useless ne'er-do-well. You blurt everything out, and your long tongue never ceases wagging for a moment. If you had remained silent in the inn, this misfortune would never have overtaken you, so you have only yourself to blame for your present suffering." Antonio listened to his master's words in silence, looking for all the world like a whipped dog. When he had been 3 more years in the ogre's service, he had another bad fit of homesickness, and longed very much to see his mother and sisters again. So he asked for permission to go home on a visit, and it was at once granted to him. Before he set out on his journey, the ogre presented him with a beautifully carved stick and said, "Take this stick as a remembrance of me, but beware of saying, 'Rise up, stick,' and 'Lie down, stick.' For if you do, I can only say I wouldn't be in your shoes for something." Antonio took the stick and said, "Don't be in the least alarmed. I'm not such a fool as you think, and know better than most people what 2 and 2 make." "I'm glad to hear it," replied the ogre. "But words are women, deeds are men. You have heard what I said, and forewarned is forearmed." This time, Antonio thanked his master warmly for all his kindness and started on his homeward journey in great spirits. But he had not gone half a mile when he said, "Rise up, stick." The words were hardly out of his mouth when the stick rose and began to rain down blows on poor Antonio's back with such lightning-like rapidity that he had hardly strength to call out, "Lie down, stick." But as soon as he uttered the words, the stick lay down and ceased beating his back black and blue. Although he had learnt a lesson at some cost to himself, Antonio was full of joy, for he saw a way now of revenging himself on the wicked landlord. Once more he arrived at the inn, and was received in the most friendly and hospitable manner by his host. Antonio greeted him cordially and said, "My friend, will you kindly take care of this stick for me? But whatever you do, don't say, 'Rise up, stick.' If you do, you will be sorry for it, and you needn't expect any sympathy from me." The landlord, thinking he was coming in for a third piece of good fortune, gave Antonio an excellent supper, and after he had seen him comfortably to bed, he ran to the stick, and calling to his wife to come and see the fun, he lost no time in pronouncing the words, "Rise up, stick." The moment he spoke, the stick jumped up and beat the landlord so unmercifully that he and his wife ran screaming to Antonio, and, waking him up, pleaded for mercy. When Antonio saw how successful his trick had been, he said, "I refuse to help you unless you give me all that you have stolen from me. Otherwise, you will be beaten to death." The landlord, who felt himself at death's door already, cried out, "Take back your property, only release me from this terrible stick." And with these words he ordered the donkey, the tablecloth, and other treasures to be restored to their rightful owner. As soon as Antonio had recovered his belongings, he said, "Stick, lie down." And it stopped beating the landlord at once. Then he took his donkey and tablecloth and arrived safely at his home with them. This time the magic words had the desired effect, and the donkey and tablecloth provided the family with treasures untold. Antonio very soon married off his sister, made his mother rich for life, and they all lived happily forever after. A Fairy's Blunder. Once upon a time, there lived a fairy whose name was Dindanet. She was the best creature in the world, with the kindest heart, but she had not much sense and was always doing things to benefit people, which generally ended in causing pain and distress to everybody concerned. No one knew this better than the inhabitants of an island far off in the midst of the sea, which, according to the laws of fairyland, she had taken under her special protection, thinking day and night of what she could do to make the isle the pleasantest place in the whole world, as it was the most beautiful. Now what happened was this. As the fairy went about unseen from house to house, she heard everywhere children longing for the time when they would be grown up and able, they thought, to do as they liked, and old people talking about the past and sighing to be young again. "Is there no way of satisfying these poor things?" she thought. And then one night an idea occurred to her. "Oh yes, of course. It has been tried before, but I will manage better than the rest with their old fountain of youth, which, after all, only made people young again. I will enchant the spring that bubbles up in the middle of the orchard, and the children that drink of it shall at once become grown men and women, and the old people return to the days of their childhood." And without stopping to consult one single other fairy who might have given her good advice, off rushed Dindanet to cast her spell over the fountain. It was the only spring of fresh water in the island, and at dawn was crowded with people of all ages come to drink at its source. Delighted at her plan for making them all happy, the fairy hid herself behind a thicket of roses and peeped out whenever footsteps came that way. It was not long before she had ample proof of the success of her enchantments. Almost before her eyes, the children put on the size and strength of adults, while the old men and women instantly became helpless, tiny babies. Indeed, so pleased was she with the result of her work that she could no longer remain hidden, and went about telling everybody what she had done and enjoying their gratitude and thanks. But after the first outburst of delight at their wishes being granted, people began to be a little frightened at the rapid effects of the magic water. It was delicious to feel yourself at the height of your power and beauty, but you would wish to keep so always. Now this was exactly what the fairy had been in too much of a hurry to arrange, and no sooner had the children become grown up and the men and women become babies than they all rushed on to old age at an appalling rate. The fairy only found out her mistake when it was too late to set it right. Perhaps the worst part of the enchantment was that the change from one age to another was so rapid that the person had no time to prepare himself for it. It would not have mattered so much if the man who stood up in the assembly of the nation to give his advice as to peace or war had looked like a baby, as long as he spoke with the knowledge and sense of a full-grown man. But, alas, with the outward form of an infant, he had taken on its helplessness and foolishness, and there was no one who could train him to better things. The end of it all was that before a month had passed, the population had died out, and the fairy Dindanet, ashamed and grieved at the effects of her folly, had left the island forever. Many centuries after, the fairy Selnazura, who had fallen into bad health, was ordered by her doctors to make the tour of the world twice a week for change of air. And in one of these journeys, she found herself at Fountain Island. Selnazura never made these trips alone, but always took with her 2 children, of whom she was very fond. Cornichon, a boy of 14, bought in his childhood at a slave market, and Toupette, a few months younger, who had been entrusted to the care of the fairy by her guardian, the genius Cristopo. Cornichon and Toupette were intended by Selnazura to become husband and wife as soon as they were old enough. Meanwhile, they traveled with her in a little vessel, whose speed through the air was just 1,950 times greater than that of the swiftest of our ships. Struck with the beauty of the island, Selnazura ran the vessel to ground, and leaving it in the care of the dragon which lived in the hold during the voyage, stepped on shore with her 2 companions. Surprised at the sight of a large town, whose streets and houses were absolutely desolate, the fairy resolved to put her magic arts in practice to find out the cause. While she was thus engaged, Cornichon and Toupette wandered away by themselves, and by arrived at the fountain, whose bubbling waters looked cool and delicious on such a hot day. Scarcely had they each drunk a deep draught when the fairy, who by this time had discovered all she wished to know, hastened to the spot. "Oh, beware! Beware!" she cried the moment she saw them. "If you drink that deadly poison, you will be ruined forever." "Poison?" answered Toupette. "It is the most refreshing water I have ever tasted, and Cornichon will say so too. Unhappy children, then I am too late. Why did you leave me? Listen, and I will tell you what has befallen the wretched inhabitants of this island, and what will befall you too. The power of fairies is great," she added, when she had finished her story, "but they cannot destroy the work of another fairy. Very shortly you will pass into the weakness and silliness of extreme old age, and all I can do for you is to make it as easy to you as possible, and to preserve you from the death that others have suffered, from having no one to look after them. But the charm is working already. Cornichon is taller and more manly than he was an hour ago, and Toupette no longer looks like a little girl." It was true, but this fact did not seem to render the young people as miserable as it did Selnozoura. "Do not pity us," said Cornichon. "If we are fated to grow old so soon, let us no longer delay our marriage. What matter if we anticipate our decay, if we only anticipate our happiness too?" The fairy felt that Cornichon had reason on his side, and seeing by a glance at Toupette's face that there was no opposition to be feared from her, she answered, "Let it be so then, but not in this dreadful place. We will return at once to Bagota, and the festivities shall be the most brilliant ever seen." They all returned to the vessel, and in a few hours the 4,500 miles that lay between the island and Bagota were passed. Everyone was surprised to see the change which the short absence had made in the young people. But as the fairy had promised absolute silence about the adventure, they were none the wiser, and busied themselves in preparing their dresses for the marriage, which was fixed for the next night. Early on the following morning, the genius Cristofo arrived at the court. On one of the visits, he was in the habit of paying his ward from time to time. Like the rest, he was astonished at the sudden improvement in the child. He had always been fond of her, and in a moment he fell violently in love. Hastily demanding an audience of the fairy, he laid his proposals before her, never doubting that she would give her consent to so brilliant a match. But Selnozoura refused to listen, and even hinted that in his own interest Cristofo had better turn his thoughts elsewhere. The genius pretended to agree, but instead he went straight to Toupette's room, and flew away with her through the window, at the very instant that the bridegroom was awaiting her below. When the fairy discovered what had happened, she was furious, and sent messenger after messenger to the genius in his palace at Ratibouf, commanding him to restore Toupette without delay, and threatening to make war in case of refusal. Cristofo gave no direct answer to the fairy's envoys, but kept Toupette closely guarded in a tower, where the poor girl used all her powers of persuasion to induce him to put off their marriage. All would, however, have been quite vain if, in the course of a few days, sorrow, joined to the spell of the magic water, had not altered her appearance so completely that Cristofo was quite alarmed, and declared that she needed amusement and fresh air, and that, as his presence seemed to distress her, she should be left her own mistress. But one thing he declined to do, and that was to send her back to Bagota. In the meantime, both sides had been busily collecting armies, and Cristofo had given the command of his to a famous general, while Selnosura had placed Cornichon at the head of her forces. But before war was actually declared, Tupet's parents, who had been summoned by the genius, arrived at Ratibuf. They had never seen their daughter since they parted from her as a baby, but from time to time, travelers to Bagota had brought back accounts of her beauty. What was their amazement, therefore, at finding, instead of a lovely girl, a middle-aged woman, handsome indeed, but quite faded, looking, in fact, older than themselves. Cristofo, hardly less astonished than they were at the sudden change, thought that it was a joke on the part of one of his courtiers, who had hidden Tupet away and put this elderly lady in her place. Bursting with rage, he sent instantly for all the servants and guards of the town and inquired who had the insolence to play him such a trick and what had become of their prisoner. They replied that since Tupet had been in their charge, she had never left her rooms unveiled, and that during her walks in the surrounding gardens, her food had been brought in and placed on her table. As she preferred to eat alone, no one had ever seen her face or knew what she was like. The servants were clearly speaking the truth, and Cristofo was obliged to believe them. But, thought he, if they have not had a hand in this, it must be the work of the fairy. And in his anger, he ordered the army to be ready to march. On her side, Selnosura, of course, knew what the genius had to expect, but was deeply offended when she heard of the base trick which she was believed to have invented. Her first desire was to give battle to Cristofo at once, but with great difficulty her ministers induced her to pause and to send an ambassador to Cristofo to try to arrange matters. So the Prince Zepradi departed for the court of Ratibuf, and on his way he met Cornichon, who was encamped with his army just outside the gates of Bagota. The prince showed him the fairy's written order that for the present peace must still be kept, and Cornichon, filled with longing to see Tupet once more, begged to be allowed to accompany Zepradi on his mission to Ratibuf. By this time, the genius's passion for Tupet, which had caused all these troubles, had died out, and he willingly accepted the terms of peace offered by Zepradi, though he informed the prince that he still believed the fairy to be guilty of the dreadful change in the girl. To this, the prince only replied that on that point he had a witness who could prove, better than anyone else, if it was Tupet or not, and desired that Cornichon should be sent for. When Tupet was told that she was to see her old lover again, her heart leapt with joy. But soon the recollection came to her of all that had happened, and she remembered that Cornichon would be changed as well as she. The moment of their meeting was not all happiness, especially on the part of Tupet, who could not forget her lost beauty. And the genius, who was present, was at last convinced that he had not been deceived, and went out to sign the treaty of peace, followed by his attendants. "Ah, Tupet, my dear Tupet," cried Cornichon as soon as they were left alone. "Now that we are once more united, let our past troubles be forgotten." "Our past troubles," answered she. "And what do you call our lost beauty and the dreadful future before us? You are looking 50 years older than when I saw you last, and I know too well that fate has treated me no better." "Ah, do not say that," replied Cornichon, clasping her hand. "You are different, it is true, but every age has its graces, and surely no woman of 60 was ever handsomer than you. If your eyes had been as bright as of yore, they would have matched badly with your faded skin. The wrinkles which I notice on your forehead explain the increased fullness of your cheeks, and your throat, in withering, is elegant in decay. Thus, the harmony shown by your features, even as they grow old, is the best proof of their former beauty." "Oh, monster!" cried Toupette, bursting into tears. "Is that all the comfort you can give me?" "But, Toupette," answered Cornichon, "you used to declare that you did not care for beauty, as long as you had my heart." "Yes, I know," said she. "But how can you go on caring for a person who is as old and plain as I?" "Toupette, Toupette," replied Cornichon, "you are only talking nonsense. My heart is as much yours as ever it was, and nothing in the world can make any difference." At this point of the conversation, the Prince Zeprady entered the room with the news that the genius, full of regret for his behavior, had given Cornichon full permission to depart for Bagota as soon as he liked, and to take Toupette with him, adding that, though he begged they would excuse his taking leave of them before they went, he hoped before long to visit them at Bagota. Neither of the lovers slept that night. Cornichon from joy at returning home, Toupette from dread of the blow to her vanity which awaited her at Bagota. It was hopeless for Cornichon to try to console her during the journey with the reasons he had given the day before. She only grew worse and worse, and when they reached the palace, went straight to her old apartments, entreating the fairy to allow both herself and Cornichon to remain concealed, and to see no one. For some time after their arrival, the fairy was taken up with the preparations for the rejoicings which were to celebrate the peace, and with the reception of the genius, who was determined to do all in his power to regain Selnozoura's lost friendship. Cornichon and Toupette were therefore left entirely to themselves, and though this was only what they wanted, still they began to feel a little neglected. At length, one morning, they saw from the windows that the fairy and the genius were approaching, in state, with all their courtiers in attendance. Toupette instantly hid herself in the darkest corner of the room, but Cornichon, forgetting that he was now no longer a boy of 14, ran to meet them. In so doing, he tripped and fell, bruising one of his eyes severely. At the sight of her lover lying helpless on the floor, Toupette hastened to his side, but her feeble legs gave way under her, and she fell almost on top of him, knocking out 3 of her loosened teeth against his forehead. The fairy, who entered the room at this moment, burst into tears, and listened in silence to the genius, who hinted that by and by everything would be put right. "At the last assembly of the fairies," he said, "when the doings of each fairy were examined and discussed, a proposal was made to lessen, as far as possible, the mischief caused by Dindonette by enchanting the fountain. And it was decided that, as she had meant nothing but kindness, she should have the power of undoing 1/2 of the spell. Of course, she might always have destroyed the fatal fountain, which would have been best of all. But this she never thought of. Yet, in spite of this, her heart is so good that I am sure that the moment she hears that she is wanted, she will fly to help. Only before she comes, it is for you, madam, to make up your mind which of the 2 shall regain their former strength and beauty." At these words, the fairy's soul sank. Both Cornichon and Toupette were equally dear to her, and how could she favor one at the cost of the other? As to the courtiers, none of the men were able to understand why she hesitated a second to declare for Toupette, while the ladies were equally strong on the side of Cornichon. But however undecided the fairy might be, it was quite different with Cornichon and Toupette. "Ah, my love," exclaimed Cornichon, "at length I shall be able to give you the best proof of my devotion by showing you how I value the beauties of your mind above those of your body. While the most charming women of the court will fall victims to my youth and strength, I shall think of nothing but how to lay them at your feet and pay heartfelt homage to your age and wrinkles." "Not so fast," interrupted Toupette. "I don't see why you should have it all. Why do you heap such humiliations upon me? But I will trust to the justice of the fairy, who will not treat me so." Then she entered her own rooms and refused to leave them, in spite of the prayers of Cornichon, who begged her to let him explain. No one at the court thought or spoke of any other subject during the few days before the arrival of Dindanet, whom everybody expected to set things right in a moment. But, alas, she had no idea herself what was best to be done, and always adopted the opinion of the person she was talking to. At length, a thought struck her, which seemed the only way of satisfying both parties, and she asked the fairy to call together all the court and the people to hear her decision. "Happy is he," she began, "who can repair the evil he has caused, but happier he who has never caused any." As nobody contradicted this remark, she continued, "To me, it is only allowed to undo 1/2 of the mischief I have wrought. I could restore you your youth," she said to Cornichon, "or your beauty." Turning to Toupette, "I will do both, and I will do neither." A murmur of curiosity arose from the crowd, while Cornichon and Toupette trembled with astonishment. "No," went on Dindanet, "never should I have the cruelty to leave one of you to decay, while the other enjoys the glory of youth. And as I cannot restore you both at once to what you were, 1/2 of each of your bodies shall become young again, while the other half goes on its way to decay. I will leave it to you to choose which half it shall be, if I shall draw a line round the waist, or a line straight down the middle of the body." She looked about her proudly, expecting applause for her clever idea. But Cornichon and Toupette were shaking with rage and disappointment, and everyone else broke into shouts of laughter. In pity for the unhappy lovers, Selnazura came forward. "Do you not think," she said, "that instead of what you propose, it would be better to let them take it in turns to enjoy their former youth and beauty for a fixed time? I am sure you could easily manage that." "What an excellent notion!" cried Dindanet. "Oh yes, of course that is best. Which of you shall I touch first?" "Touch her," replied Cornichon, who was always ready to give way to Toupette. "I know her heart too well to fear any change." So the fairy bent forward and touched her with her magic ring, and in one instant the old woman was a girl again. The whole court wept with joy at the sight, and Toupette ran up to Cornichon, who had fallen down in his surprise, promising to pay him long visits and tell him of all her balls and water parties. The two fairies went to their own apartments, where the genius followed them to take his leave. "Oh dear," suddenly cried Dindanet, breaking into the farewell speech of the genius. "I quite forgot to fix the time when Cornichon should in his turn grow young. How stupid of me. And now I fear it is too late, for I ought to have declared it before I touched Toupette with the ring. Oh dear, oh dear. Why did nobody warn me?" "You were so quick," replied Selnazura, who had long been aware of the mischief the fairy had again done. "And we can only wait now till Cornichon shall have reached the utmost limits of his decay, when he will drink of the water and become a baby once more, so that Toupette will have to spend her life as a nurse, a wife, and a caretaker. After the anxiety of mind and the weakness of body to which for so long Toupette had been a prey, it seemed as if she could not amuse herself enough, and it was seldom indeed that she found time to visit poor Cornichon, though she did not cease to be fond of him, or to be kind to him. Still, she was perfectly happy without him, and this the poor man did not fail to see. Almost blind and deaf from age though he was, but it was left to Christophe to undo at last the work of Dindonette, and give Cornichon back the youth he had lost. And this the genius did all the more gladly, as he discovered quite by accident that Cornichon was in fact his son. It was on this plea that he attended the great yearly meeting of the fairies, and prayed that, in consideration of his services to so many of the members, this one boon might be granted him. Such a request had never before been heard in Fairyland, and was objected to by some of the older fairies. But both Christophe and Selnosura were held in such high honor that the murmurs of disgust were set aside, and the latest victim to the enchanted fountain was pronounced to be free of the spell. All that the genius asked in return was that he might accompany the fairy back to Bagota, and be present when his son assumed his proper shape. They made up their minds they would just tell Toupette that they had found a husband for her, and give her a pleasant surprise at her wedding, which was fixed for the following night. She heard the news with astonishment, and many pangs for the grief which Cornichon would certainly feel at his place being taken by another. But she did not dream of disobeying the fairy, and spent the whole day wondering who the bridegroom could be. At the appointed hour, a large crowd assembled at the fairy's palace, which was decorated with the sweetest flowers, known only to Fairyland. Toupette had taken her place, but where was the bridegroom? "Fetch Cornichon," said the fairy to her chamberlain. But Toupette interposed. "Oh, madam, spare him, I entreat you, this bitter pain, and let him remain hidden and in peace. It is necessary that he should be here," answered the fairy, "and he will not regret it." And as she spoke, Cornichon was led in, smiling with the foolishness of extreme old age at the sight of the gay crowd. "Bring him here," commanded the fairy, waving her hand towards Toupette, who started back from surprise and horror. Selnosura then took the hand of the poor old man, and the genius came forward and touched him 3 times with his ring, when Cornichon was transformed into a handsome young man. "May you live long," the genius said, "to enjoy happiness with your wife, and to love your father." And that was the end of the mischief wrought by the fairy Dindonette. Long, Broad, and Quickeye, a Bohemian story. Once upon a time, there lived a king who had an only son whom he loved dearly. Now one day the king sent for his son and said to him, "My dearest child, my hair is gray and I am old, and soon I shall feel no more the warmth of the sun or look upon the trees and flowers. But before I die, I should like to see you with a good wife. Therefore marry my son as speedily as possible." "My father," replied the prince, "now and always, I ask nothing better than to do your bidding, but I know of no daughter-in-law that I could give you." On hearing these words, the old king drew from his pocket a key of gold and gave it to his son, saying, "Go up the staircase, right up to the top of the tower. Look carefully round you, and then come and tell me which you like best of all that you see." So the young man went up, He had never before been in the tower and had no idea what it might contain. The staircase wound round and round and round till the prince was almost giddy, and every now and then he caught sight of a large room that opened out from the side. But he had been told to go to the top, and to the top he went. Then he found himself in a hall which had an iron door at one end. This door he unlocked with his golden key, and he passed through into a vast chamber which had a roof of blue sprinkled with golden stars, and a carpet of green silk, soft as turf. 12 windows framed in gold let in the light of the sun, and on every window was painted the figure of a young girl, each more beautiful than the last. While the prince gazed at them in surprise, not knowing which he liked best, the girls began to lift their eyes and smile at him. He waited, expecting them to speak, but no sound came. Suddenly, he noticed that one of the windows was covered by a curtain of white silk. He lifted it and saw before him the image of a maiden, beautiful as the day and sad as the tomb, clothed in a white robe, having a girdle of silver and a crown of pearls. The prince stood and gazed at her as if he had been turned into stone, but as he looked, the sadness which was on her face seemed to pass into his heart, and he cried out, "This one shall be my wife, this one and no other." As he said the words, the young girl blushed and hung her head, and all the other figures vanished. The young prince went quickly back to his father and told him all he had seen and which wife he had chosen. The old man listened to him full of sorrow, and then he spoke. "You have done ill, my son, to search out that which was hidden, and you are running to meet a great danger. This young girl has fallen into the power of a wicked sorcerer who lives in an iron castle. Many young men have tried to deliver her, and none have ever come back. But what is done is done. You have given your word, and it cannot be broken. Go, dare your fate, and return to me safe and sound." So the prince embraced his father, mounted his horse, and set forth to seek his bride. He rode on gaily for several hours, till he found himself in a wood where he had never been before, and soon lost his way among its winding paths and deep valleys. He tried in vain to see where he was. The thick trees shut out the sun, and he could not tell which was north and which was south, so that he might know what direction to make for. He felt in despair, and had quite given up all hope of getting out of this horrible place, when he heard a voice calling to him. "Hey, hey, stop a minute!" The prince turned round and saw behind him a very tall man, running as fast as his legs would carry him. "Wait for me," he panted, "and take me into your service. If you do, you will never be sorry." "Who are you?" asked the prince, "and what can you do?" "Long is my name, and I can lengthen my body at will. Do you see that nest up there on the top of that pine tree? Well, I can get it for you without taking the trouble of climbing the tree." And Long stretched himself up and up and up, till he was very soon as tall as the pine itself. He put the nest in his pocket, and before you could wink your eyelid, he had made himself small again, and stood before the prince. "Yes, you know your business," said he, "but birds' nests are no use to me. I am too old for them. Now, if you were only able to get me out of this wood, you would indeed be good for something." "Oh, there's no difficulty about that," replied Long, and he stretched himself up and up and up, till he was 3 times as tall as the tallest tree in the forest. Then he looked all round and said, "We must go in this direction in order to get out of the wood. and shortening himself again, he took the prince's horse by the bridle and led him along. Very soon they got clear of the forest and saw before them a wide plain, ending in a pile of high rocks, covered here and there with trees, and very much like the fortifications of a town. As they left the wood behind, Long turned to the prince and said, "My lord, here comes my comrade. You should take him into your service too, as you will find him a great help." "Well, call him then, so that I can see what sort of a man he is." "He is a little too far off for that," replied Long. "He would hardly hear my voice, and he couldn't be here for some time yet, as he has so much to carry. I think I had better go and bring him myself." And this time he stretched himself to such a height that his head was lost in the clouds. He made 2 or 3 strides, took his friend on his back, and set him down before the prince. The newcomer was a very fat man, and as round as a barrel. "Who are you?" asked the prince, "and what can you do?" "Your worship, Broad is my name, and I can make myself as wide as I please." "Let me see how you manage it." "Run, my lord, as fast as you can, and hide yourself in the wood," cried Broad, and he began to swell himself out. The prince did not understand why he should run to the wood, but when he saw Long flying towards it, he thought he had better follow his example. He was only just in time, for Broad had so suddenly inflated himself that he very nearly knocked over the prince and his horse, too. He covered all the space for acres round. You would have thought he was a mountain. At length, Broad ceased to expand, drew a deep breath that made the whole forest tremble, and shrank into his usual size. "You have made me run away," said the prince. "But it is not every day one meets with a man of your sort. I will take you into my service." So the 3 companions continued their journey, and when they were drawing near the rocks, they met a man, whose eyes were covered by a bandage. "Your Excellency," said Long, "this is our 3rd comrade. You will do well to take him into your service, and I assure you, you will find him worth his salt." "Who are you?" asked the prince, "and why are your eyes bandaged? You can never see your way." "It is just the contrary, my lord. It is because I see only too well that I am forced to bandage my eyes. Even so, I see as well as people who have no bandage. When I take it off, my eyes pierce through everything. Everything I look at catches fire, or if it cannot catch fire, it falls into 1,000 pieces. They call me Quickeye." And so saying, he took off his bandage and turned towards the rock. As he fixed his eyes upon it, a crack was heard, and in a few moments it was nothing but a heap of sand. In the sand, something might be detected glittering brightly. Quickeye picked it up and brought it to the prince. It turned out to be a lump of pure gold. "You are a wonderful creature," said the prince, "and I should be a fool not to take you into my service. But since your eyes are so good, tell me if I am very far from the Iron Castle, and what is happening there just now." "If you were traveling alone," replied Quickeye, "it would take you at least a year to get to it. But as we are with you, we shall arrive there tonight. Just now they are preparing supper. There is a princess in the castle. Do you see her? A wizard keeps her in a high tower, guarded by iron bars." "Ah, help me to deliver her," cried the prince, and they promised they would. Then they all set out through the gray rocks, by the breach made by the eyes of Quickeye, and passed over great mountains and through deep woods. And every time they met with any obstacle, the 3 friends contrived somehow to put it aside. As the sun was setting, the prince beheld the towers of the iron castle, and before it sank beneath the horizon, he was crossing the iron bridge which led to the gates. He was only just in time, for no sooner had the sun disappeared altogether than the bridge drew itself up and the gates shut themselves. There was no turning back now. The prince put up his horse in the stable, where everything looked as if a guest was expected, and then the whole party marched straight up to the castle. In the court, in the stables, and all over the great halls, they saw a number of men richly dressed, but everyone turned into stone. They crossed an endless set of rooms, all opening into each other, till they reached the dining hall. It was brilliantly lighted. The table was covered with wine and fruit, and was laid for 4. They waited a few minutes expecting someone to come, but as nobody did, they sat down and began to eat and drink, for they were very hungry. When they had done their supper, they looked about for some place to sleep. But suddenly the door burst open, and the wizard entered the hall. He was old and humpbacked, with a bald head and a gray beard that fell to his knees. He wore a black robe, and instead of a belt, 3 iron circlets clasped his waist. He led by the hand a lady of wonderful beauty, dressed in white, with a girdle of silver and a crown of pearls. But her face was pale and sad as death itself. The prince knew her in an instant and moved eagerly forward. But the wizard gave him no time to speak and said, "I know why you are here. Very good. You may have her if for 3 nights following you can prevent her making her escape. If you fail in this, you and your servants will all be turned into stone, like those who have come before you." And offering the princess a chair, he left the hall. The prince could not take his eyes from the princess. She was so lovely. He began to talk to her, but she neither answered nor smiled, and sat as if she were made of marble. He seated himself by her, and determined not to close his eyes that night, for fear she should escape him. And in order that she should be doubly guarded, Long stretched himself, like a strap all round the room. Broad took his stand by the door and puffed himself out, so that not even a mouse could slip by. And Quickeye leant against a pillar which stood in the middle of the floor and supported the roof. But in half a second, they were all sound asleep, and they slept sound the whole night long. In the morning, at the first peep of dawn, the prince awoke with a start. But the princess was gone. He aroused his servants and implored them to tell him what he must do. "Calm yourself, my lord," said Quickeye. "I have found her already. 100 miles from here there is a forest. In the middle of the forest an old oak, and on the top of the oak an acorn. This acorn is the princess. If Long will take me on his shoulders, we shall soon bring her back." And sure enough, in less time than it takes to walk round a cottage, they had returned from the forest, and Long presented the acorn to the prince. "Now, your excellency, throw it on the ground." The prince obeyed, and was enchanted to see the princess appear at his side. But when the sun peeped for the first time over the mountains, the door burst open as before, and the wizard entered with a loud laugh. Suddenly, he caught sight of the princess. His face darkened. He uttered a low growl, and one of the iron circlets gave way with a crash. He seized the young girl by the hand and bore her away with him. All that day the prince wandered about the castle, studying the curious treasures it contained, but everything looked as if life had suddenly come to a standstill. In one place he saw a prince who had been turned into stone in the act of brandishing a sword round which his 2 hands were clasped. In another, the same doom had fallen upon a knight in the act of running away. In a third, a serving man was standing eternally trying to convey a piece of beef to his mouth, and all around them were others, still preserving forevermore the attitudes they were in when the wizard had commanded, "From henceforth be turned into marble." In the castle and round the castle all was dismal and desolate. Trees there were, but without leaves. Fields there were, but no grass grew on them. There was one river, but it never flowed, and no fish lived in it. No flowers blossomed, and no birds sang. 3 times during the day food appeared, as if by magic, for the prince and his servants. And it was not until supper was ended that the wizard appeared, as on the previous evening, and delivered the princess into the care of the prince. All 4 determined that this time they would keep awake at any cost. But it was no use. Off they went as they had done before, and when the prince awoke the next morning, the room was again empty. With a pang of shame, he rushed to find Quickeye. "Awake, awake, Quickeye! Do you know what has become of the princess?" Quickeye rubbed his eyes and answered, "Yes, I see her. 200 miles from here there is a mountain. In this mountain is a rock. In the rock, a precious stone. This stone is the princess. Long shall take me there, and we will be back before you can turn round." So Long took him on his shoulders, and they set out. At every stride they covered 20 miles, and as they drew near, Quickeye fixed his burning eyes on the mountain. In an instant it split into 1,000 pieces, and in one of these sparkled the precious stone. They picked it up and brought it to the prince, who flung it hastily down, and as the stone touched the floor, the princess stood before him. When the wizard came, his eyes shot forth flames of fury. Crick-crack was heard, and another of his iron bands broke and fell. He seized the princess by the hand and led her off, growling louder than ever. All that day things went on exactly as they had done the day before. After supper, the wizard brought back the princess, and looking him straight in the eyes, he said, "We shall see which of us 2 will gain the prize after all." That night they struggled their very hardest to keep awake, and even walked about instead of sitting down. But it was quite useless. One after another they had to give in, and for the 3rd time the princess slipped through their fingers. When morning came, it was as usual the prince who awoke the first, and as usual the princess being gone, he rushed to Quickeye. Get up, Quickeye, and tell me where is the princess?" Quickeye looked about for some time without answering. "Oh, my lord, she is far, very far. 300 miles away there lies a black sea. In the middle of this sea there is a little shell, and in the middle of the shell is fixed a gold ring. That gold ring is the princess. But do not vex your soul, we will get her. Only today Long must take Broad with him. He will be wanted badly." So Long took Quickeye on one shoulder and Broad on the other, and they set out. At each stride they left 30 miles behind them. When they reached the Black Sea, Quickeye showed them the spot where they must seek the shell. But though Long stretched down his hand as far as it would go, he could not find the shell, for it lay at the bottom of the sea. "Wait a moment, comrades. It will be all right. I will help you," said Broad. Then he swelled himself out so that you would have thought the world could hardly have held him, and stooping down, he drank. He drank so much at every mouthful that only a minute or so passed before the water had sunk enough for Long to put his hand to the bottom. He soon found the shell and pulled the ring out. But time had been lost, and Long had a double burden to carry. The dawn was breaking fast before they got back to the castle, where the prince was waiting for them in an agony of fear. Soon the first rays of the sun were seen peeping over the tops of the mountains. The door burst open, and finding the prince standing alone, the wizard broke into peals of wicked laughter. But as he laughed, a loud crash was heard. The window fell into 1,000 pieces. A gold ring glittered in the air, and the princess stood before the enchanter. For Quickeye, who was watching from afar, had told Long of the terrible danger now threatening the prince, and Long, summoning all his strength for one gigantic effort, had thrown the ring right through the window. The wizard shrieked and howled with rage till the whole castle trembled to its foundations. Then a crash was heard. The third band split in two, and a crow flew out of the window. Then the princess at length broke the enchanted silence, and blushing like a rose, gave the prince her thanks for her unlooked-for deliverance. But it was not only the princess who was restored to life by the flight of the wicked black crow. The marble figures became men once more, and took up their occupations just as they had left them off. The horses neighed in the stables, the flowers blossomed in the garden, the birds flew in the air, the fish darted in the water. Everywhere you looked, all was life, all was joy, and the knights who had been turned into stone came in a body to offer their homage to the prince who had set them free. "Do not thank me," he said, "for I have done nothing. Without my faithful servants, Long, Broad, and Quickeye, I should even have been as one of you." With these words he bade them farewell, and departed with the princess and his faithful companions for the kingdom of his father. The old king, who had long since given up all hope, wept for joy at the sight of his son, and insisted that the wedding should take place as soon as possible. All the knights who had been enchanted in the Iron Castle were invited to the ceremony, and after it had taken place, Long, Broad, and Quickeye took leave of the young couple, saying that they were going to look for more work. The prince offered them all their hearts could desire if they would only remain with him. But they replied that an idle life would not please them, and that they could never be happy unless they were busy. So they went away to seek their fortunes, and for all I know, are seeking still. Prunella, there was once upon a time a woman who had an only daughter. When the child was about 7 years old, she used to pass every day, on her way to school, an orchard where there was a wild plum tree with delicious ripe plums hanging from the branches. Each morning the child would pick one and put it into her pocket to eat at school. For this reason she was called Prunella. Now the orchard belonged to a witch. One day the witch noticed the child gathering a plum as she passed along the road. Prunella did it quite innocently, not knowing that she was doing wrong in taking the fruit that hung close to the roadside. But the witch was furious, and next day hid herself behind the hedge. And when Prunella came past and put out her hand to pluck the fruit, she jumped out and seized her by the arm. "Ah, you little thief!" she exclaimed. "I have caught you at last. Now you will have to pay for your misdeeds." The poor child, half dead with fright, implored the old woman to forgive her, assuring her that she did not know she had done wrong, and promising never to do it again. But the witch had no pity, and she dragged Prunella into her house, where she kept her till the time should come when she could have her revenge. As the years passed, Prunella grew up into a very beautiful girl. Now her beauty and goodness, instead of softening the witch's heart, aroused her hatred and jealousy. One day she called Prunella to her and said, "Take this basket, go to the well, and bring it back to me filled with water. If you don't, I will kill you." The girl took the basket, went and let it down into the well again and again, but her work was lost labor. Each time, as she drew up the basket, the water streamed out of it. At last, in despair, she gave it up, and leaning against the well, she began to cry bitterly, when suddenly she heard a voice at her side, saying, "Prunella, why are you crying?" Turning round, she beheld a handsome youth, who looked kindly at her, as if he were sorry for her trouble. "Who are you?" she asked, "and how do you know my name?" "I am the son of the witch," he replied, "and my name is Bensurdatu. I know that she is determined that you shall die, but I promise you that she shall not carry out her wicked plan. Will you give me a kiss if I fill your basket?" "No," said Prunella, "I will not give you a kiss, because you are the son of a witch." "Very well," replied the youth sadly. "Give me your basket, and I will fill it for you." And he dipped it into the well, and the water stayed in it. Then the girl returned to the house, carrying the basket filled with water. When the witch saw it, she became white with rage and exclaimed, "Bensurdatu must have helped you." And Prunella looked down and said nothing. "Well, we shall see who will win in the end," said the witch in a great rage. The following day she called the girl to her and said, "Take this sack of wheat. I am going out for a little. By the time I return, I shall expect you to have made it into bread. If you have not done it, I will kill you." Having said this, she left the room, closing and locking the door behind her. Poor Prunella did not know what to do. It was impossible for her to grind the wheat, prepare the dough, and bake the bread, all in the short time that the witch would be away. At first, she set to work bravely, but when she saw how hopeless her task was, she threw herself on a chair and began to weep bitterly. She was roused from her despair by hearing Bensurdatu's voice at her side saying, "Prunella, Prunella, do not weep like that. If you will give me a kiss, I will make the bread, and you will be saved." "I will not kiss the son of a witch," replied Prunella. But Bensurdatu took the wheat from her and ground it and made the dough, and when the witch returned, the bread was ready baked in the oven. Turning to the girl with fury in her voice, she said, "Bensurdatu must have been here and helped you." And Prunella looked down and said nothing. "We shall see who will win in the end," said the witch, and her eyes blazed with anger. Next day she called the girl to her and said, "Go to my sister, who lives across the mountains. She will give you a casket, which you must bring back to me." This she said, knowing that her sister, who was a still more cruel and wicked witch than herself, would never allow the girl to return, but would imprison her and starve her to death. But Prunella did not suspect anything, and set out quite cheerfully. On the way, she met Bensurdatu. "Where are you going, Prunella?" he asked. "I am going to the sister of my mistress, from whom I am to fetch a casket." "Oh, poor, poor girl," said Bensurdatu. "You are being sent straight to your death. Give me a kiss, and I will save you." But again Prunella answered as before, "I will not kiss the son of a witch. "Nevertheless, I will save your life," said Bensurdatu, "for I love you better than myself. Take this flagon of oil, this loaf of bread, this piece of rope, and this broom. When you reach the witch's house, oil the hinges of the door with the contents of the flagon, and throw the loaf of bread to the great fierce mastiff who will come to meet you. When you have passed the dog, you will see in the courtyard a miserable woman trying in vain to let down a bucket into the well with her plaited hair. You must give her the rope. In the kitchen you will find a still more miserable woman trying to clean the hearth with her tongue. To her you must give the broom. You will see the casket on the top of a cupboard. Take it as quickly as you can, and leave the house without a moment's delay. If you do all this exactly as I have told you, you will not be killed." So Prunella, having listened carefully to his instructions, did just what he had told her. She reached the house, oiled the hinges of the door, threw the loaf to the dog, gave the poor woman at the well the rope, and the woman in the kitchen the broom, caught up the casket from the top of the cupboard, and fled with it out of the house. But the witch heard her as she ran away, and rushing to the window, called out to the woman in the kitchen, "Kill that thief, I tell you." But the woman replied, "I will not kill her, for she has given me a broom, whereas you forced me to clean the hearth with my tongue." Then the witch called out in fury to the woman at the well, "Take the girl, I tell you, and fling her into the water, and drown her." But the woman answered, "No, I will not drown her, for she gave me this rope, whereas you forced me to use my hair to let down the bucket to draw water." Then the witch shouted to the dog to seize the girl and hold her fast. But the dog answered, "No, I will not seize her, for she gave me a loaf of bread, whereas you let me starve with hunger." The witch was so angry that she nearly choked as she called out, "Door, bang upon her and keep her a prisoner." But the door answered, "I won't, for she has oiled my hinges so that they move quite easily, whereas you left them all rough and rusty." And so Prunella escaped, and, with the casket under her arm, reached the house of her mistress, who, as you may believe, was as angry as she was surprised to see the girl standing before her, looking more beautiful than ever. Her eyes flashed, as in furious tones she asked her, "Did you meet Bensurdatu?" But Prunella looked down and said nothing. "We shall see," said the witch, "who will win in the end. Listen, there are 3 cocks in the hen house. One is yellow, one black, and the third is white. If one of them crows during the night, you must tell me which one it is. Woe to you if you make a mistake. I will gobble you up in one mouthful." Now Bensurdatu was in the room next to the one where Prunella slept. At midnight, she awoke, hearing a cock crow. "Which one was that?" shouted the witch. Then, trembling, Prunella knocked on the wall and whispered, "Bensurdatu, Bensurdatu, tell me, which cock crowed? Will you give me a kiss if I tell you?" He whispered back through the wall. But she answered no. Then he whispered back to her, "Nevertheless, I will tell you. It was the yellow cock that crowed." The witch, who had noticed the delay in Prunella's answer, approached her door, calling angrily, "Answer at once, or I will kill you." So Prunella answered, "It was the yellow cock that crowed." And the witch stamped her foot and gnashed her teeth. Soon after another cock crowed. "Tell me now which one it is," called the witch. And, prompted by Bensurdatu, Prunella answered, "That is the black cock." A few minutes after the crowing was heard again, and the voice of the witch demanding, "Which one was that?" And again Prunella implored Bensurdatu to help her. But this time he hesitated, for he hoped that Prunella might forget that he was a witch's son, and promised to give him a kiss. And as he hesitated, he heard an agonized cry from the girl. "Bensurdatu, Bensurdatu, save me. The witch is coming. She is close to me. I hear the gnashing of her teeth." With a bound, Bensurdatu opened his door and flung himself against the witch. He pulled her back with such force that she stumbled, and falling headlong, dropped down dead at the foot of the stairs. Then, at last, Prunella was touched by Bensurdatu's goodness and kindness to her, and she became his wife, and they lived happily ever after. The Simpleton. There lived once upon a time a man who was as rich as he could be. But as no happiness in this world is ever quite complete, he had an only son who was such a simpleton that he could barely add 2 and 2 together. At last his father determined to put up with his stupidity no longer, and giving him a purse full of gold, he sent him off to seek his fortune in foreign lands, mindful of the adage, "How much a fool that's sent to Rome excels a fool that stays at home." Moscione, for this was the youth's name, mounted a horse and set out for Venice, hoping to find a ship there that would take him to Cairo. After he had ridden for some time, he saw a man standing at the foot of a poplar tree, and said to him, "What's your name, my friend? Where do you come from, and what can you do?" The man replied, "My name is Quick as Thought. I come from Fleet Town, and I can run like lightning." "I should like to see you," returned Moscione. "Just wait a minute then," said Quick as Thought, "and I will soon show you that I am speaking the truth." The words were hardly out of his mouth when a young doe ran right across the field they were standing in. Quick as Thought let her run on a short distance in order to give her a start, and then pursued her so quickly and so lightly that you could not have tracked his footsteps if the field had been strewn with flour. In a very few springs, he had overtaken the doe, and had so impressed Moscione with his fleetness of foot that he begged Quick as Thought to go with him, promising at the same time to reward him handsomely. Quick as Thought agreed to his proposal, and they continued on their journey together. They had hardly gone a mile when they met a young man, and Moscione stopped and asked him, "What's your name, my friend? Where do you come from, and what can you do?" The man thus addressed answered promptly, "I am called Hare's Ear. I come from Curiosity Valley, and if I lay my ear on the ground, without moving from the spot, I can hear everything that goes on in the world, the plots and intrigues of court and cottage, and all the plans of mice and men." "If that's the case," replied Moscione, "just tell me what's going on in my own home at present." The youth laid his ear to the ground and at once reported, "An old man is saying to his wife, 'Heaven be praised that we have got rid of Moscione, for perhaps, when he has been out in the world a little, he may gain some common sense and return home less of a fool than when he set out.'" "Enough, enough!" cried Moscione. "You speak the truth, and I believe you. Come with us, and your fortune's made." The young man consented, and after they had gone about 10 miles, they met a third man, to whom Moscione said, "What's your name, my brave fellow? Where were you born, and what can you do?" The man replied, "I am called Hit the Point. I come from the city of Perfect Aim, and I draw my bow so exactly that I can shoot a pea off a stone." "I should like to see you do it, if you've no objection," said Moscione. The man at once placed a pea on a stone, and, Drawing his bow, he shot it in the middle with the greatest possible ease. When Mosione saw that he had spoken the truth, he immediately asked Hit the Point to join his party. After they had all traveled together for some days, they came upon a number of people who were digging a trench in the blazing sun. Mosione felt so sorry for them that he said, "My dear friends, how can you endure working so hard in heat that would cook an egg in a minute?" But one of the workmen answered, "We are as fresh as daisies, for we have a young man among us who blows on our backs like the west wind." "Let me see him," said Mosione. The youth was called, and Mosione asked him, "What's your name? Where do you come from? And what can you do?" He answered, "I am called Blowblast. I come from Windtown, and with my mouth I can make any winds you please. If you wish a west wind, I can raise it for you in a second. But if you prefer a north wind, I can blow these houses down before your eyes." "Seeing is believing," returned the cautious Mosione. Blowblast at once began to convince him of the truth of his assertion. First he blew so softly that it seemed like the gentle breeze at evening, and then he turned round and raised such a mighty storm that he blew down a whole row of oak trees. When Mosione saw this, he was delighted and begged Blowblast to join his company. And as they went on their way, they met another man, whom Mosione addressed as usual. "What's your name? Where do you come from? And what can you do?" "I am called Strongback. I come from Powerborough, and I possess such strength that I can take a mountain on my back, and it seems a feather to me." "If that's the case," said Mosione, "you are a clever fellow, but I should like some proof of your strength." Then Strongback loaded himself with great boulders of rock and trunks of trees, so that 100 wagons could not have taken away all that he carried on his back. When Mosione saw this, he prevailed on Strongback to join his troop, and they all continued their journey till they came to a country called Flower Vale. Here there reigned a king whose only daughter ran as quickly as the wind, and so lightly that she could run over a field of young oats without bending a single blade. The king had given out a proclamation that anyone who could beat the princess in a race should have her for a wife, but that all who failed in the competition should lose their head. As soon as Mosione heard of the royal proclamation, he hastened to the king and challenged the princess to race with him. But on the morning appointed for the trial, he sent word to the king that he was not feeling well, and that as he could not run himself, he would supply someone to take his place. "It's just the same to me," said Cannetella the princess. "Let anyone come forward that likes. I am quite prepared to meet him." At the time appointed for the race, the whole place was crowded with people anxious to see the contest, and, punctual to the moment, quick as thought, and Cannetella, dressed in a short skirt and very lightly shod, appeared at the starting point. Then a silver trumpet sounded, and the two rivals started on their race, looking for all the world like a greyhound chasing a hare. But quick as thought, true to his name, outran the princess. And when the goal was reached, the people all clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the stranger!" Cannetella was much depressed by her defeat, but as the race had to be run a second time, she determined she would not be beaten again. Accordingly, she went home and sent Quick as Thought a magic ring, which prevented the person who wore it not only from running, but even from walking, and begged that he would wear it for her sake. Early next morning the crowd assembled on the race course, and Cannetella and Quick as Thought began their trial afresh. The princess ran as quickly as ever, But poor Quick's thought was like an overloaded donkey, and could not go a step. Then hit the point, who had heard all about the princess's deception from Hare's Ear, when he saw the danger his friend was in, seized his bow and arrow, and shot the stone out of the ring Quick's thought was wearing. In a moment, the youth's legs became free again, and in 5 bounds he had overtaken Cannetella and won the race. The king was much disgusted when he saw that he must acknowledge Motion as his future son-in-law, and summoned the wise men of his court to ask if there was no way out of the difficulty. The council at once decided that Cannetella was far too dainty a morsel for the mouth of such a traveling tinker, and advised the king to offer Motion a present of gold, which no doubt a beggar like him would prefer to all the wives in the world. The king was delighted at this suggestion, and calling Motion before him, he asked him what sum of money he would take instead of his promised bride. Motion first consulted with his friends, and then answered, "I demand as much gold and precious stones as my followers can carry away." The king thought he was being let off very easily, and produced coffers of gold, sacks of silver, and chests of precious stones. But the more Strong Back was loaded with the treasure, the straighter he stood. At last, the treasury was quite exhausted, and the king had to send his courtiers to his subjects to collect all the gold and silver they possessed. But nothing was of any avail, and Strong Back only asked for more. When the king's counselors saw the unexpected result of their advice, they said it would be more than foolish to let some strolling thieves take so much treasure out of the country, and urged the king to send a troop of soldiers after them to recover the gold and precious stones. So the king sent a body of armed men on foot and horse to take back the treasure Strong Back was carrying away with him. But Hare's Ear, who had heard what the counselors had advised the king, told his companions just as the dust of their pursuers was visible on the horizon. No sooner had Blowblast taken in their danger than he raised such a mighty wind that all the king's army was blown down like so many ninepins. And as they were quite unable to get up again, Motion and his companions proceeded on their way without further let or hindrance. As soon as they reached his home, Motion divided his spoil with his companions, at which they were much delighted. He himself stayed with his father, who was obliged at last to acknowledge that his son was not quite such a fool as he looked. Janni and the Draken. Once there was a man who shunned the world and lived in the wilderness. He owned nothing but a flock of sheep, whose milk and wool he sold, and so procured himself bread to eat. He also carried wooden spoons and sold them. He had a wife and one little girl, and after a long time, his wife had another child. The evening it was born, the man went to the nearest village to fetch a nurse, and on the way he met a monk who begged him for a night's lodging. This the man willingly granted, and took him home with him. There being no one far nor near to baptize the child, the man asked the monk to do him this service, and the child was given the name of Janni. In the course of time, Janni's parents died, and he and his sister were left alone in the world. Soon affairs went badly with them, so they determined to wander away to seek their fortune. In packing up, the sister found a knife which the monk had left for his godson, and this she gave to her brother. Then they went on their way, taking with them the 3 sheep which were all that remained of their flocks. After wandering for 3 days, they met a man with 3 dogs, who proposed that they should exchange animals, he taking the sheep, and they the dogs. The brother and sister were quite pleased at this arrangement, and after the exchange was made, they separated and went their different ways. Janni and his sister in course of time came to a great castle in which dwelt 40 Draken, who, when they heard that Janni had come, fled 40 fathoms underground. So Janni found the castle deserted and abode there with his sister, and every day went out to hunt with the weapons the Draken had left in the castle. One day, when he was away hunting, one of the Draken came up to get provisions, not knowing that there was anyone in the castle. When he saw Janni's sister, he was terrified, but she told him not to be afraid, and by they fell in love with each other, for every time that Janni went to hunt, the sister called the Dracos up. Thus they went on making love to each other till, at length, unknown to Janni, they got married. Then, when it was too late, the sister repented, and was afraid of Janni's wrath when he found it out. One day the Dracos came to her and said, "You must pretend to be ill, and when Janni asks what ails you and what you want, you must answer, 'Cherries.' And when he inquires where these are to be found, you must say, 'There are some in a garden a day's journey from here.' Then your brother will go there and will never come back, for there dwell 3 of my brothers who will look after him well." Then the sister did as the Dracos advised, and next day Janni set out to fetch the cherries, taking his 3 dogs with him. When he came to the garden where the cherries grew, he jumped off his horse, drank some water from the spring, which rose there, and fell directly into a deep sleep. The Draken came round about to eat him, but the dogs flung themselves on them and tore them in pieces, and scratched a grave in the ground with their paws, and buried the Draken, so that Janni might not see their dead bodies. When Janni awoke and saw his dogs all covered with blood, he believed that they had caught, somewhere, a wild beast, and was angry because they had left none of it for him. But he plucked the cherries and took them back to his sister. When the Dracos heard that Janni had come back, he fled for fear 40 fathoms underground. And the sister ate the cherries and declared herself well again. The next day, when Janni was gone to hunt, the Dracos came out and advised the sister that she should pretend to be ill again. And when her brother asked her what she would like, she should answer quinces. And when he inquired where these were to be found, she should say, "In a garden distant about 2 days' journey." Then would Janni certainly be destroyed, for there dwelt 6 brothers of the Dracos, each of whom had 2 heads. The sister did as she was advised, and next day Janni again set off, taking his 3 dogs with him. When he came to the garden, he dismounted, sat down to rest a little, and fell fast asleep. First there came 3 Draken, round about to eat him, and when these 3 had been worried by the dogs, there came 3 others, who were worried in like manner. Then the dogs again dug a grave, and buried the dead Draken, that their master might not see them. When Janni awoke and beheld the dogs all covered with blood, he thought, as before, that they had killed a wild beast, and was again angry with them for leaving him nothing. But he took the quinces and brought them back to his sister, who, when she had eaten them, declared herself better. The Dracos, when he heard that Janni had come back, fled for fear 40 fathoms deeper underground. Next day, when Janni was hunting, the Dracos went to the sister and advised that she should again pretend to be ill, and should beg for some pears, which grew in a garden 3 days' journey from the castle. From this quest, Janni would certainly never return, for there dwelt 9 brothers of the Dracos, each of whom had 3 heads. The sister did as she was told, and next day Janni, taking his 3 dogs with him, went to get the pears. When he came to the garden, he laid himself down to rest, and soon fell asleep. Then first came 3 Draken to eat him, and when the dogs had worried these, 6 others came, and fought the dogs a long time. The noise of this combat awoke Janni, and he slew the Draken, and knew at last why the dogs were covered with blood. After that he freed all whom the Draken held prisoners, amongst others, a king's daughter. Out of gratitude she would have taken him for her husband, but he put her off, saying, "For the kindness that I have been able to do to you, you shall receive in this castle all the blind and lame who pass this way." The princess promised him to do so, and on his departure gave him a ring. So Janni plucked the pears and took them to his sister, who, when she had eaten them, declared she felt better. When, however, the Dracos heard that Janni had come back yet a 3rd time safe and sound, he fled for fright 40 fathoms deeper underground. And next day, when Janni was away hunting, he crept out and said to the sister, "Now are we indeed both lost, unless you find out from him wherein his strength lies, and then between us we will contrive to do away with him." When therefore Janni had come back from hunting, and sat at evening with his sister by the fire, she begged him to tell her wherein lay his strength, and he answered, "It lies in my 2 fingers. If these are bound together, then all my strength disappears." "That I will not believe," said the sister, "unless I see it for myself." Then he let her tie his fingers together with a thread, and immediately he became powerless. Then the sister called up the Dracos, who, when he had come forth, tore out Janni's eyes, gave them to his dogs to eat, and threw him into a dry well. Now it happened that some travelers, going to draw water from this well, heard Janni groaning at the bottom. They came near and asked him where he was, and he begged them to draw him up from the well, for he was a poor, unfortunate man. The travelers let a rope down and drew him up to daylight. It was not till then that he first became aware that he was blind, and he begged the travelers to lead him to the country of the king, whose daughter he had freed, and they would be well repaid for their trouble. When they had brought him there, he sent to beg the princess to come to him, but she did not recognize him till he had shown her the ring she had given him. Then she remembered him, and took him with her into the castle. When she learnt what had befallen him, she called together all the sorceresses in the country, in order that they should tell her where the eyes were. At last, she found one who declared that she knew where they were, and that she could restore them. This sorceress, then, went straight to the castle where dwelt the sister and the Dracos, and gave something to the dogs to eat, which caused the eyes to reappear. She took them with her, and put them back in Janni's head, so that he saw as well as before. Then he returned to the castle of the Dracos, whom he slew as well as his sister, and taking his dogs with him, went back to the princess, and they were immediately married. Udea and her 7 brothers. Once upon a time, there was a man and his wife who had 7 boys. The children lived in the open air and grew big and strong, and the 6 eldest spent part of every day hunting wild beasts. The youngest did not care so much about sport, and he often stayed with his mother. One morning, however, as the whole 7 were going out for a long expedition, they said to their aunt, "Dear aunt, if a baby sister comes into the world today, wave a white handkerchief, and we will return immediately. But if it is only a boy, just brandish a sickle, and we will go on with what we are doing." Now the baby, when it arrived, really proved to be a girl, but as the ant could not bear the boys, she thought it was a good opportunity to get rid of them. So she waved the sickle. And when the 7 brothers saw the sign, they said, "Now we have nothing to go back for," and plunged deeper into the desert. The little girl soon grew to be a big girl, and she was called by all her friends, though she did not know it, Udea, who had driven her 7 brothers into strange lands. One day, when she had been quarreling with her playmates, the oldest among them said to her, "It is a pity you were born, as ever since your brothers have been obliged to roam about the world." Udea did not answer, but went home to her mother and asked her, "Have I really got brothers?" "Yes," replied her mother, "7 of them, but they went away the day you were born, and I have never heard of them since." Then the girl said, "I will go and look for them till I find them." "My dear child," answered her mother, "it is 15 years since they left, and no man has seen them. How will you know which way to go?" "Oh, I will follow them, north and south, east and west, and though I may travel far, yet some day I will find them." Then her mother said no more, but gave her a camel and some food, and a Negro and his wife to take care of her. And she fastened a cowrie shell round the camel's neck for a charm, and bade her daughter go in peace. During the first day, the party journeyed on without any adventures, but the second morning the Negro said to the girl, "Get down, and let the negress ride instead of you." "Mother," cried Udea. "What is it?" asked her mother. "Barca wants me to dismount from my camel." "Leave her alone, Barca," commanded the mother, and Barca did not dare to persist. But on the following day, he said again to Udea, "Get down, and let the negress ride instead of you." And though Udea called to her mother, she was too far away, and the mother never heard her. Then the Negro seized her roughly and threw her on the ground, and said to his wife, "Climb up." And the negress climbed up, while the girl walked by the side. She had meant to ride all the way on her camel, as her feet were bare, and the stones cut them till the blood came. But she had to walk on till night, when they halted, and the next morning it was the same thing again. Weary and bleeding, the poor girl began to cry, and implored the Negro to let her ride, if only for a little. But he took no notice, except to bid her walk a little faster. By and by they passed a caravan, and the Negro stopped and asked the leader if they had come across 7 young men who were thought to be hunting somewhere about. And the man answered, "Go straight on, and by midday you will reach the castle where they live." When he heard this, the black melted some pitch in the sun, and smeared the girl with it, till she looked as much a Negro as he did. Next he bade his wife get down from the camel, and told Udea to mount, which she was thankful to do. So they arrived at her brother's castle. Leaving the camel kneeling at the entrance for Udea to dismount, the Negro knocked loudly at the door, which was opened by the youngest brother, all the others being away hunting. He did not, of course, recognize Udea, but he knew the Negro and his wife, and welcomed them gladly, adding, "But who does the other negress belong to?" "Oh, that is your sister," said they. "My sister? But she is coal-black." "That may be, but she is your sister for all that." The young man asked no more questions, but took them into the castle, and he himself waited outside till his brothers came home. As soon as they were alone, the Negro whispered to Udea, If you dare to tell your brothers that I made you walk, or that I smeared you with pitch, I will kill you." "Oh, I will be sure to say nothing," replied the girl, trembling, and at that moment the 6 elder brothers appeared in sight. "I have some good news for you," said the youngest, hastening to meet them. "Our sister is here." "Nonsense," they answered. "We have no sister. You know the child that was born was a boy." "But that was not true," replied he, "and here she is with the Negro and his wife. Only, she too is black," he added softly. But his brothers did not hear him and pushed past joyfully. "How are you, good old Barca?" they said to the Negro. "And how comes it that we never knew that we had a sister till now?" And they greeted Udea warmly, while she shed tears of relief and gladness. The next morning they all agreed that they would not go out hunting, and the eldest brother took Udea on his knee, and she combed his hair and talked to him of their home till the tears ran down his cheeks and dropped on her bare arm, and where the tears fell a white mark was made. Then the brother took a cloth and rubbed the place, and he saw that she was not black at all. "Tell me, who painted you over like this?" cried he. "I am afraid to tell you," sobbed the girl. "The Negro will kill me." "Afraid, and with 7 brothers. Well, I will tell you then," she answered. "The Negro forced me to dismount from the camel and let his wife ride instead. And the stones cut my feet till they bled, and I had to bind them. And after that, when we heard your castle was nearby, he took pitch and smeared my body with it." Then the brother rushed in wrath from the room, and seizing his sword, cut off first the Negro's head and then his wife's. He next brought in some warm water and washed his sister all over, till her skin was white and shining again. "Ah, now we see that you are our sister," they all said. "What fools the Negro must have thought us, to believe for an instant that we could have a sister who was black." And all that day and the next they remained in the castle. But on the 3rd morning they said to their sister, "Dear sister, you must lock yourself into this castle with only the cat for company, and be very careful never to eat anything which she does not eat too. You must be sure to give her a bit of everything. In 7 days we shall be back again." "All right," she answered, and locked herself into the castle with the cat. On the 8th day, the brothers came home. "How are you?" they asked. "You have not been anxious?" "No, why should I be anxious? The gates were fast locked, and in the castle are 7 doors, and the 7th is of iron. What is there to frighten me?" "No one will try to hurt us," said the brothers, "for they fear us greatly. But for yourself, we implore you to do nothing without consulting the cat, who has grown up in the house, and take care never to neglect her advice." "All right," replied Udea, "and whatever I eat, she shall have half." "Capital. And if ever you are in danger, the cat will come and tell us. Only elves and pigeons, which fly round your window, know where to find us." "This is the first I have heard of the pigeons," said Udea. "Why did you not speak of them before?" "We always leave them food and water for 7 days," replied the brothers. "Ah," sighed the girl, "if I had only known, I would have given them fresh food and fresh water, for after 7 days anything becomes bad. Would it not be better if I fed them every day?" "Much better," said they, "and we shall feel any kindnesses you do towards the cat or the pigeons exactly as if they were shown to ourselves." "Set your minds at ease," answered the girl. "I will treat them as if they were my brothers." That night the brothers slept in the castle, But after breakfast next morning, they buckled on their weapons and mounted their horses and rode off to their hunting grounds, calling out to their sister, "Mind you let nobody in till we come back." "Very well," cried she, and kept the doors carefully locked for 7 days, and on the 8th the brothers returned as before. Then, after spending one evening with her, they departed as soon as they had done breakfast. Directly they were out of sight, Udea began to clean the house, and among the dust she found a bean which she ate. "What are you eating?" asked the cat. "Nothing," said she. "Open your mouth and let me see." The girl did as she was told, and then the cat said, "Why did you not give me half?" "I forgot," answered she, "but there are plenty of beans about. You can have as many as you like." "No, that won't do. I want half of that particular bean." "But how can I give it you? I tell you I have eaten it. I can roast you 100 others." "No, I want half of that one." "Oh, do as you like, only go away," cried she. So the cat ran straight to the kitchen fire and spit on it and put it out. And when Udea came to cook the supper, she had nothing to light it with. "Why did you put the fire out?" asked she. "Just to show you how nicely you would be able to cook the supper. Didn't you tell me to do what I liked?" The girl left the kitchen and climbed up on the roof of the castle and looked out. Far, far away, so far that she could hardly see it, was the glow of a fire. "I will go and fetch a burning coal from there and light my fire," thought she, and opened the door of the castle. When she reached the place where the fire was kindled, a hideous man-eater was crouching over it. "Peace be with you, grandfather," said she. "The same to you," replied the man-eater. "What brings you here, Udea?" "I came to ask for a lump of burning coal to light my fire with." "Do you want a big lump or a little lump?" "Why, what difference does it make?" said she. "If you have a big lump, you must give me a strip of your skin from your ear to your thumb, and if you have a little lump, you must give me a strip from your ear to your little finger." Udea, who thought that one sounded as bad as the other, said she would take the big lump, and when the man-eater had cut the skin, she went home again. And as she hastened on, a raven beheld the blood on the ground and plastered it with earth, and stayed by her till she reached the castle. And as she entered the door, he flew past, and she shrieked from fright, for up to that moment she had not seen him. In her terror she called after him, "May you get the same start as you have given me." "Why should you wish me harm?" asked the raven, pausing in his flight, "when I have done you a service." "What service have you done me?" said she. "Oh, you shall soon see," replied the raven, and with his bill he scraped away all the earth he had smeared over the blood, and then flew away. In the night the man-eater got up and followed the blood till he came to Udea's castle. He entered through the gate which she had left open, and went on till he reached the inside of the house. But here he was stopped by the 7 doors, 6 of wood and 1 of iron, and all fast locked. And he called through them, "O Udea, what did you see your grandfather doing?" "I saw him spread silk under him, and silk over him, and lay himself down in a 4-post bed." When he heard that, the man-eater broke in 1 door and laughed and went away. And the 2nd night he came back and asked her again what she had seen her grandfather doing. And she answered him as before, and he broke in another door and laughed and went away. And so each night till he reached the 7th door. Then the maiden wrote a letter to her brothers, and bound it round the neck of a pigeon, and said to it, O thou pigeon that served my father and my grandfather, carry this letter to my brothers, and come back at once." And the pigeon flew away. It flew, and it flew, and it flew, till it found the brothers. The eldest unfastened the letter from the pigeon's neck, and read what his sister had written. "I am in a great strait, my brothers. If you do not rescue me tonight, tomorrow I shall be no longer living, for the man-eater has broken open 6 doors, and only the iron door is left. So haste, haste, post-haste." "Quick, quick, my brothers," cried he. "What is the matter?" asked they. "If we cannot reach our sister tonight, tomorrow she will be the prey of the man-eater." And without more words they sprang on their horses and rode like the wind. The gate of the castle was thrown down, and they entered the court and called loudly to their sister. But the poor girl was so ill with fear and anxiety that she could not even speak. Then the brothers dismounted and passed through the 6 open doors, till they stood before the iron one, which was still shut. "Udea, open," they cried. "It is only your brothers." And she arose and unlocked the door, and throwing herself on the neck of the eldest, burst into tears. "Tell us what has happened," he said, "and how the man-eater traced you here." "It is all the cat's fault," replied Udea. "She put out my fire so that I could not cook, all about a bean. I ate one and forgot to give her any of it." "But we told you so particularly," said the eldest brother, "never to eat anything without sharing it with the cat." "Yes, but I tell you I forgot," answered Udea. "Does the man-eater come here every night?" asked the brothers. "Every night," said Udea, "and he breaks one door in and then goes away." Then all the brothers cried together, "We will dig a great hole and fill it with burning wood and spread a covering over the top, and when the man-eater arrives, we will push him into it." So they all set to work and prepared the great hole and set fire to the wood till it was reduced to a mass of glowing charcoal. And when the man-eater came and called as usual, "Udea, what did you see your grandfather doing?" She answered, "I saw him pull off the ass, skin and devour the ass, and he fell in the fire, and the fire burned him up. Then the man-eater was filled with rage, and he flung himself upon the iron door and burst it in. On the other side stood Udea's 7 brothers, who said, 'Come, rest yourself a little on this mat.' And the man-eater sat down, and he fell right into the burning pit which was under the mat, and they heaped on more wood, till nothing was left of him, not even a bone. Only one of his fingernails was blown away, and fell into an upper chamber where Udea was standing, and stuck under one of the nails of her own fingers. And she sank lifeless to the earth. Meanwhile, her brothers sat below, waiting for her and wondering why she did not come. "What can have happened to her?" exclaimed the eldest brother. "Perhaps she has fallen into the fire too." So one of the others ran upstairs and found his sister stretched on the floor. "Udea, Udea," he cried, but she did not move or reply. Then he saw that she was dead, and rushed down to his brothers in the courtyard and called out, "Come quickly, our sister is dead." In a moment they were all beside her, and knew that it was true. And they made a bier, and laid her on it, and placed her across a camel, and said to the camel, "Take her to her mother, but be careful not to halt by the way, and let no man capture you, and see you kneel down before no man, save him who shall say, 'String,' footnote, Riemen, to you. But to him who says, 'String,' then kneel." So the camel started, and when it had accomplished half its journey, it met 3 men, who ran after it in order to catch it, but they could not. Then they cried, "Stop!" But the camel only went the faster. The 3 men panted behind, till one said to the others, "Wait a minute, the string of my sandal is broken." The camel caught the word "string" and knelt down at once, and the men came up and found a dead girl lying on a bier with a ring on her finger. And as one of the young men took hold of her hand to pull off the ring, he knocked out the man-eater's fingernail, which had stuck there, and the maiden sat up and said, "Let him live who gave me life, and slay him who slew me." And when the camel heard the maiden speak, it turned and carried her back to her brothers. Now the brothers were still seated in the court, bewailing their sister, and their eyes were dim with weeping, so that they could hardly see. And when the camel stood before them, they said, "Perhaps it has brought back our sister," and rose to give it a beating. But the camel knelt down, and the girl dismounted, and they flung themselves on her neck and wept more than ever for gladness. "Tell me," said the eldest as soon as he could speak, "how it all came about, and what killed you." "I was waiting in the upper chamber," said she, "and a nail of the man-eater's stuck under my nail, and I fell dead upon the ground. That is all I know." "But who pulled out the nail?" asked he. "A man took hold of my hand and tried to pull off my ring, and the nail jumped out and I was alive again. And when the camel heard me say, 'Let him live who gave me life, slay him who slew me,' it turned and brought me back to the castle. That is my story." She was silent, and the eldest brother spoke. "Will you listen to what I have to say, my brothers?" And they replied, "How should we not hear you? Are you not our father as well as our brother? Then this is my advice. Let us take our sister back to our father and mother, that we may see them once more before they die." And the young men agreed, and they mounted their horses and placed their sister in a litter on the camel. So they set out. At the end of 5 days' journey, they reached the old home, where their father and mother dwelt alone. And the heart of their father rejoiced, and he said to them, "Dear sons, why did you go away and leave your mother and me to weep for you night and day?" "Dear father," answered the son, "let us rest a little now, and then I will tell you everything from the beginning." "All right," replied the father, and waited patiently for 3 days. And on the morning of the 4th day, the eldest brother said, "Dear father, would you like to hear our adventures?" "Certainly I should." "Well, it was our aunt who was the cause of our leaving home, for we agreed that if the baby was a sister, she should wave a white handkerchief, and if it was a brother, she should brandish a sickle, for then there would be nothing to come back for, and we might wander far away. Now our aunt could not bear us, and hated us to live in the same house with her, so she brandished the sickle, and we went away. That is all our story. And that is all this story. The Story of Bensurdatu. There was once a king and a queen who had 3 wonderfully beautiful daughters, and their one thought, from morning till night, was how they could make the girls happy. One day the princesses said to the king, "Dear father, we want so much to have a picnic and eat our dinner in the country." "Very well, dear children, let us have a picnic by all means," answered he, and gave orders that everything should be got ready. When luncheon was prepared, it was put into a cart, and the royal family stepped into a carriage and drove right away into the country. After a few miles, they reached a house and garden belonging to the king, and close by was their favorite place for lunch. The drive had made them very hungry, and they ate with a hearty appetite till almost all the food had disappeared. When they had quite done, they said to their parents, "Now we should like to wander about the garden a little, but when you want to go home, just call to us." And they ran off, laughing, down a green glade which led to the garden. But no sooner had they stepped across the fence than a dark cloud came down and covered them, and prevented them seeing whither they were going. Meanwhile, the king and queen sat lazily among the heather, and an hour or two slipped away. The sun was dropping towards the horizon, and they began to think it was time to go home. So they called to their daughters and called again, but no one answered them. Frightened at the silence, they searched every corner of the garden, the house, and the neighboring wood, but no trace of the girls was to be found anywhere. The earth seemed to have swallowed them up. The poor parents were in despair. The queen wept all the way home, and for many days after, and the king issued a proclamation that whoever should bring back his lost daughters should have one of them to wife, and should, after his death, reign in his stead. Now 2 young generals were at that time living at the court, and when they heard the king's declaration, they said one to the other, "Let us go in search of them. Perhaps we shall be the lucky persons." And they set out, each mounted on a strong horse, taking with them a change of raiment and some money. But though they inquired at every village they rode through, they could hear nothing of the princesses. And by their money was all spent, and they were forced to sell their horses or give up the search. Even this money only lasted a little while longer, and nothing but their clothes lay between them and starvation. They sold the spare garments that were bound on their saddles, and went in the coats they stood up in to the inn to beg for some food, as they were really starving. When, however, they had to pay for what they had eaten and drank, they said to the host, "We have no money, and naught but the clothes we stand up in. Take these, and give us instead some old rags, and let us stay here and serve you." And the innkeeper was content with the bargain, and the generals remained, and were his servants. All this time the king and queen remained in their palace, hungering for their children, but not a word was heard of either of them or of the generals who had gone to seek for them. Now there was living in the palace a faithful servant of the king's called Bensurdatu, who had served him for many years. And when Bensurdatu saw how grieved the king was, he lifted up his voice and said to him, "Your Majesty, let me go and seek your daughters." "No, no, Bensurdatu," replied the king. "3 daughters have I lost and 2 generals, and shall I lose you also?" But Bensurdatu said again, "Let me now go, your Majesty. Trust me, and I will bring you back your daughters." Then the king gave way, and Bensurdatu set forth, and rode on till he came to the inn, where he dismounted and asked for food. It was brought by the 2 generals, whom he knew at once in spite of their miserable clothes, and much astonished, asked them how in the world they came there. They told him all their adventures, and he sent for the innkeeper and said to him, "Give them back their garments, and I will pay everything that they owe you." And the innkeeper did as he was bid, and when the 2 generals were dressed in their proper clothes, they declared they would join Bensurdatu, and with him seek for the king's daughters. The 3 companions rode on for many miles, and at length they came to a wild place, without sign of a human being. It was getting dark, and fearing to be lost on this desolate spot, they pushed on their horses, and at last saw a light in the window of a tiny hut. "Who comes there?" asked a voice as they knocked at the door. "Oh, have pity on us, and give us a night's shelter," replied Bensurdatu. "We are 3 tired travelers who have lost our way." Then the door was opened by a very old woman who stood back and beckoned them to enter. "Whence do you come, and whither do you go?" said she. "Ah, good woman, we have a heavy task before us," answered Bensurdatu. "We are bound to carry the king's daughters back to the palace." "Oh, unhappy creatures," cried she, "you know not what you are doing. The king's daughters were covered by a thick cloud, and no one knows where they may now be." "Oh, tell us if you know, my good woman," entreated Bensurdatu, "for with them lies all our happiness." "Even if I were to tell you," answered she, "you could not rescue them. To do that, you would have to go to the very bottom of a deep river, and though certainly you would find the king's daughters there, yet the 2 eldest are guarded by 2 giants, and the youngest is watched by a serpent with 7 heads. The 2 generals, who stood by listening, were filled with terror at her words, and wished to return immediately. But Bensurdatu stood firm and said, "Now we have got so far, we must carry the thing through. Tell us where the river is, so that we may get there as soon as possible." And the old woman told them, and gave them some cheese, wine, and bread, so that they should not set forth starving. And when they had eaten and drunk, they laid themselves down to sleep. The sun had only just risen above the hills next morning before they all woke, and taking leave of the wise woman who had helped them, they rode on till they came to the river. "I am the eldest," said one of the generals, "and it is my right to go down first." So the others fastened a cord round him, and gave him a little bell, and let him down into the water. But scarcely had the river closed above his head, when such dreadful rushing sounds and peals of thunder came crashing round about him, that he lost all his courage, and rang his bell, if perchance it might be heard amidst all this clamor. Great was his relief when the rope began slowly to pull him upwards. Then the other general plunged in, but he fared no better than the first, and was soon on dry ground again. For answer he drew his sword, and was about to cut off the giant's head, when she stopped him quickly, and made signs to hide himself, as the giant was just beginning to wake. "I smell the flesh of a man," murmured he, stretching his great arms. "Why, how in the world could any man get down here?" replied she. "You had better go to sleep again." So he turned over and went to sleep. Then the princess signed to Bensurdatu, who drew his sword and cut off the giant's head with such a blow that it flew into the corner. And the heart of the princess leapt within her, and she placed a golden crown on the head of Bensurdatu, and called him her deliverer. "Now show me where your sisters are," he said, "that I may free them also." So the princess opened a door and led him into another hall, wherein sat her next sister, guarded by a giant who was fast asleep. When the second princess saw them, she made a sign to them to hide themselves, for the giant was showing symptoms of waking. "I smell man's flesh," murmured he sleepily. "Now, how could any man get down here?" asked she. "Go to sleep again." And as soon as he closed his eyes, Bensurdatu stole out from his corner and struck such a blow at his head that it flew far, far away. The princess could not find words to thank Bensurdatu for what he had done, and she too placed in his hand a golden crown. "Now show me where your youngest sister is," said he, "that I may free her also." "Ah, that I fear you will never be able to do," sighed they. for she is in the power of a serpent with 7 heads." "Take me to him," replied Bensurdatu. "It will be a splendid fight." Then the princess opened a door, and Bensurdatu passed through, and found himself in a hall that was even larger than the other 2. And there stood the youngest sister, chained fast to the wall, and before her was stretched a serpent with 7 heads, horrible to see. As Bensurdatu came forward, it twisted all its 7 heads in his direction, and then made a quick dart to snatch him within its grasp. But Bensurdatu drew his sword and laid about him till the 7 heads were rolling on the floor. Flinging down his sword, he rushed to the princess and broke her chains, and she wept for joy, and embraced him, and took the golden crown from off her head, and placed it in his hand. "Now we must go back to the upper world," said Bensurdatu, and led her to the bottom of the river. The other princesses were waiting there, and he tied the rope round the eldest, and rung his bell. And the generals above heard, and drew her gently up. They then unfastened the cord and threw it back into the river. And in a few moments the second princess stood beside her sister. So now there were left only Bensurdatu and the youngest princess. "Dear Bensurdatu," said she, "do me a kindness, and let them draw you up before me. I dread the treachery of the generals." "No, no," replied Bensurdatu. "I certainly will not leave you down here. There is nothing to fear from my comrades. If it is your wish, I will go up then. But first I swear that if you do not follow to marry me, I shall stay single for the rest of my life." Then he bound the rope round her, and the generals drew her up. But instead of lowering the rope again into the river, envy at the courage and success of Bensurdatu so filled the hearts of the 2 generals that they turned away and left him to perish. And more than that, they threatened the princesses and forced them to promise to tell their parents that it was the 2 generals who had set them free. "And if they should ask you about Bensurdatu, you must say you have never seen him," they added. And the princesses, fearing for their lives, promised everything, and they rode back to court together. The king and queen were beside themselves with joy when they saw their dear children once more. But when the generals had told their story and the dangers they had run, the king declared that they had gained their reward, and that the 2 eldest princesses should become their wives. And now we must see what poor Bensurdatu was doing. He waited patiently a long, long time. But when the rope never came back, he knew he had been right, and that his comrades had betrayed him. "Ah, now I shall never reach the world again," murmured he. But being a brave man, and knowing that moaning his fate would profit him nothing, he rose and began to search through the 3 halls, where, perhaps, he might find something to help him. In the last one stood a dish covered with food, which reminded him that he was hungry, and he sat down and ate and drank. Months passed away, when one morning, as he was walking through the halls, he noticed a purse hanging on the wall, which had never been there before. He took it down to examine it, and nearly let it fall with surprise, when a voice came from the purse saying, "What commands have you? Oh, take me out of this horrible place and up into the world again." And in a moment he was standing by the river bank, with the purse tightly grasped in his hand. "Now let me have the most beautiful ship that ever was built, all manned and ready for sea." And there was the ship, with a flag floating from its mast on which were the words, "King with the 3 crowns." Then Bensurdatu climbed on board and sailed away to the city where the 3 princesses dwelt. And when he reached the harbor, he blew trumpets and beat drums, so that everyone ran to the doors and windows. And the king heard too, and saw the beautiful vessel, and said to himself, "That must indeed be a mighty monarch, for he has 3 crowns while I have only 1. So he hastened to greet the stranger, and invited him to his castle, for, thought he, "This will be a fine husband for my youngest daughter." Now the youngest princess had never married, and had turned a deaf ear to all her wooers. Such a long time had passed since Bensurdatu had left the palace, that the king never guessed for a moment that the splendidly clad stranger before him was the man whom he had so deeply mourned as dead. "Noble lord," said he, "let us feast and make merry together. And then, if it seem good to you, do me the honor to take my youngest daughter to wife." And Bensurdatu was glad, and they all sat down to a great feast, and there were great rejoicings. But only the youngest daughter was sad, for her thoughts were with Bensurdatu. After they arose from the table, the king said to her, "Dear child, this mighty lord does you the honor to ask your hand in marriage." "O father," answered she, "spare me, I pray you, for I desire to remain single." Then Bensurdatu turned to her and said, "And if I were Bensurdatu, would you give the same answer to me?" And as she stood silently gazing at him, he added, "Yes, I am Bensurdatu, and this is my story." The king and queen had their hearts stirred within them at the tale of his adventures, and when he had ended, the king stretched out his hand and said, "Dear Bensurdatu, my youngest daughter shall indeed be your wife, and when I die, my crown shall be yours. As for the men who have betrayed you, they shall leave the country, and you shall see them no more." And the wedding feast was ordered, and rejoicings were held for 3 days over the marriage of Bensurdatu and the youngest princess. Bobino. Once on a time, there was a rich merchant who had an only son called Bobino. Now, as the boy was clever and had a great desire for knowledge, his father sent him to be under a master, from whom he thought he would learn to speak all sorts of foreign languages. After some years with this master, Bobino returned to his home. One evening, as he and his father were walking in the garden, the sparrows in the trees above their heads began such a twittering that they found it impossible to hear each other speak. This annoyed the merchant very much, so to soothe him, Bobino said, "Would you like me to explain to you what the sparrows are saying to each other?" The merchant looked at his son in astonishment and answered, "What can you mean? How can you explain what the sparrows say? Do you consider yourself a soothsayer or a magician?" "I am neither a soothsayer nor a magician," answered Bobino, "but my master taught me the language of all the animals." "Alas, for my good money!" exclaimed the merchant. "The master has certainly mistaken my intention. Of course I meant you to learn the languages that human beings talk, and not the language of animals." "Have patience," answered the son. "My master thought it best to begin with the language of animals, and later to learn the languages of human beings." On their way into the house, the dog ran to meet them, barking furiously. "What can be the matter with the beast?" said the merchant. "Why should he bark at me like that, when he knows me quite well?" "Shall I explain to you what he is saying?" said Bobino. "Leave me in peace, and don't trouble me with your nonsense," said the merchant quite crossly. "How my money has been wasted!" A little later, as they sat down to supper, some frogs in a neighboring pond set up such a croaking as had never been heard. The noise so irritated the merchant that he quite lost his temper and exclaimed, "This only was wanting to add the last drop to my discomfort and disappointment. Shall I explain to you?" began Bobino. "Will you hold your tongue with your explanations?" shouted the merchant. "Go to bed, and don't let me see your face again." So Bobino went to bed and slept soundly. But his father, who could not get over his disappointment at the waste of his money, was so angry that he sent for 2 servants and gave them orders, which they were to carry out on the following day. Next morning, one of the servants awakened Bobino early and made him get into a carriage that was waiting for him. The servant placed himself on the seat beside him, while the other servant rode alongside the carriage as an escort. Bobino could not understand what they were going to do with him or where he was being taken, but he noticed that the servant beside him looked very sad, and his eyes were all swollen with crying. Curious to know the reason, he said to him, "Why are you so sad, and where are you taking me?" But the servant would say nothing. At last, moved by Bobino's entreaties, he said, "My poor boy, I am taking you to your death, and what is worse, I am doing so by the order of your father." "But why?" exclaimed Bobino. "Does he want me to die? What evil have I done him, or what fault have I committed that he should wish to bring about my death?" "You have done him no evil," answered the servant. "Neither have you committed any fault, but he is half mad with anger because, in all these years of study, you have learnt nothing but the language of animals. He expected something quite different from you. That is why he is determined you shall die." "I have not the heart to do it," answered the servant. "I would rather think of some way of saving your life and at the same time of protecting ourselves from your father's anger. By good luck, the dog has followed us. We will kill it and cut out the heart and take it back to your father. He will believe it is yours, and you, in the meantime, will have made your escape." When they had reached the thickest part of the wood, Bobino got out of the carriage, and having said goodbye to the servants, set out on his wanderings. On and on he walked, till at last, late in the evening, he came to a house where some herdsmen lived. He knocked at the door and begged for shelter for the night. The herdsman, seeing how gentle a youth he seemed, made him welcome and bade him sit down and share their supper. While they were eating it, the dog in the courtyard began to bark. Bobino walked to the window, listened attentively for a minute, and then, turning to the herdsman, said, "Send your wives and daughters at once to bed, and arm yourselves as best you can, because at midnight a band of robbers will attack this house." The herdsmen were quite taken aback, and thought that the youth must have taken leave of his senses. "How can you know," they said, "that a band of robbers mean to attack us? Who told you so?" "I know it from the dog's barking," answered Bobino. "I understand his language, and if I had not been here, the poor beast would have wasted his breath to no purpose. You had better follow my advice if you wish to save your lives and property." The herdsmen were more and more astonished, but they decided to do as Bobino advised. They sent their wives and daughters upstairs. Then, having armed themselves, they took up their position behind a hedge, waiting for midnight. Just as the clock struck 12, they heard the sound of approaching footsteps, and a band of robbers cautiously advanced towards the house. But the herdsmen were on the lookout. They sprang on the robbers from behind the hedge, and with blows from their cudgels soon put them to flight. You may believe how grateful they were to Bobino, to whose timely warning they owed their safety. They begged him to stay and make his home with them, but as he wanted to see more of the world, he thanked them warmly for their hospitality and set out once more on his wanderings. All day he walked, and in the evening he came to a peasant's house. While he was wondering whether he should knock and demand shelter for the night, he heard a great croaking of frogs in a ditch behind the house. Stepping to the back, he saw a very strange sight. 4 frogs were throwing a small bottle about from one to the other, making a great croaking as they did so. Bobino listened for a few minutes, and then knocked at the door of the house. It was opened by the peasant, who asked him to come in and have some supper. When the meal was over, his host told him that they were in great trouble, as his eldest daughter was so ill that they feared she could not recover. A great doctor, who had been passing that way some time before, had promised to send her some medicine that would have cured her, but the servant to whom he had entrusted the medicine had let it drop on the way back, and now there seemed no hope for the girl. Then Bobino told the father of the small bottle he had seen the frogs play with, and that he knew that was the medicine which the doctor had sent to the girl. The peasant asked him how he could be sure of this, and Bobino explained to him that he understood the language of animals, and had heard what the frogs said as they tossed the bottle about. So the peasant fetched the bottle from the ditch and gave the medicine to his daughter. In the morning she was much better, and the grateful father did not know how to thank Bobino enough. But Bobino would accept nothing from him, and having said goodbye, set out once more on his wanderings. One day, soon after this, he came upon 2 men resting under a tree in the heat of the day. Being tired, he stretched himself on the ground at no great distance from them, and soon they all 3 began to talk to one another. In the course of conversation, Bobino asked the 2 men where they were going, and they replied that they were on their way to a neighboring town, where, that day, a new ruler was to be chosen by the people. While they were still talking, some sparrows settled on the tree under which they were lying. Bobino was silent, and appeared to be listening attentively. At the end of a few minutes he said to his companions, "Do you know what those sparrows are saying? They are saying that today one of us will be chosen ruler of that town." The men said nothing, but looked at each other. A few minutes later, seeing that Bobino had fallen asleep, they stole away and made with all haste for the town, where the election of a new ruler was to take place. A great crowd was assembled in the marketplace, waiting for the hour when an eagle should be let loose from a cage. For it had been settled that on whosoever house the eagle alighted, the owner of that house should become ruler of the town. At last the hour arrived. The eagle was set free, and all eyes were strained to see where it would alight. But circling over the heads of the crowd, it flew straight in the direction of a young man, who was at that moment entering the town. This was none other than Bobino, who had awakened soon after his companions had left him, and had followed in their footsteps. All the people shouted and proclaimed that he was their future ruler, and he was conducted by a great crowd to the governor's house, which was for the future to be his home. And here he lived happily, and ruled wisely over the people.